Maeve is a baddie bad, okay?
We'll die on this hill. We'll die on this hill.
We don't have enough evidence to like fully support this, but you just feel it in your bones. And the fact that Maeve has a power that presents similarly to what the King of Adarlan is doing, who is obviously using dark magic of the word keys, that is so suspicious. Why is her power similar? What actually is her power? Who is Maeve? Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today, we are continuing our Heir of Fire coverage with chapters 53 through 58. And wow, what a set of chapters. There was so much emotion from finally learning what happened the night Terrasen fell, Aelin and Rowan being Karanom, and then, of course, discovering the third word key. I was just so excited about everything that we learned. And I'm just even more excited for what they learn from Maeve moving forward, because per usual, with the end of an SJM book comes 100 new questions for the next book.
100? You mean like 1,000? 1,000 new questions. It's so funny that you were so excited because honestly, I was very sad. Obviously, I was exciting to see her, come into her power and all that. But I just feel sad. I feel anxious. I still don't feel good. I don't feel good because even if she is the most powerful magical being in all of existence, when she goes to Aurelia, it won't matter. She can't use that. So what is she going to do? I don't feel good. I feel very nervous.
That's fair. I was really sad in chapter 54. Actually, that's kind of funny when you think about chapter 54 from ACOTAR, that everybody is like, woo! And then chapter 54 in the Throne of Glass series is just polar
absolute despair. Yes. Hopelessness, sorrow, the saddest thing I've ever read. Yeah. Huge difference. Huge difference.
For as sad as it was, I am very glad that we A, finally learned what happened, and that B, through that experience, Aelin has a renewed perspective about her role, and she finally knows the truth of it, and hopefully does not think of herself as a monster anymore, because she was 8 and none of that was her fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
that's true. That's true. It is nice to see her, face her trauma and reframe it and use it as a motivating factor instead, but it's just so sad. This may be the episode, guys, where I cry. I really thought before we read Tab, everyone was like, oh, Sam. I thought I was going to cry, and I was like, okay, well, whatever. I didn't care at all. I'm sorry. It did not faze me at all. I mean, it's sad that he died, but did not break me. I was just like,
no.
Okay, keep it moving. What's next? Honestly.
No, I'm telling you, every time there is some kind of war battle scene in an SJM book, it always gets me every time. It happened to me in Crescent City. I was like bawling my eyes out for these things. And then this set of chapters, I wasn't full on bawling, but there was some tears. My eyes were
a little misty, a little misty-eyed.
Yeah, they were getting misty because I was like, ugh. But anyways, as a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 53 through 58 specifically, but it is likely that references to all books we've covered so far will come up. This includes TOG, Com, and Tab. If you haven't finished these books and you don't want spoilers, please pause here and then come back when you're caught up. Otherwise, this series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series, but of course, you will be getting plenty of our unhinged theories. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you are reading along with us, then next week's Heir of Fire episode will cover chapters 59 through 68, which will finally take us to the end of Heir of Fire.
Woo! Never thought that day would come.
It's been a long time. We have 12 episodes total for this book right now. So
yeah. Well, in fairness, this book is a lot longer than Com and Tab and TOG. Not a crazy amount, but it is longer for sure.
Next, Addison, where are we at with the Onyx Storm countdown?
Okay, today is November 3rd, and there are 79 days until Onyx Storm is released.
Wow.
Yay! Zayden.
Finally, if you are enjoying the show, then the very best way for you to support us is to rate our podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. If you have not done so yet, then go ahead and do it right now. Open up whatever app you're on and get your rating or review in, because obviously this helps us greatly on the podcast platforms so we can continue growing our little book club community. I love hearing from you all. And speaking of communication, we do actually need your help. We are seeking feedback from our listeners about Onyx Storm coverage. Please send us a text, email us, DM us, and let us know if you want Onyx Storm coverage. If you do, are you cool with us pausing TOG to cover Onyx Storm, or would you prefer that we do not pause TOG and either work it in secondarily or just do it later? I don't know. Whatever your opinion is, please let us know so we can make a decision that works for our audience, since, of course, our primary objective is to make this podcast relevant to you all.
Don't take Onyx Storm away from me. Don't make me wait. Trust me, if you haven't read it yet, start now. You'll want us to cover it. But in all seriousness, we're just trying to do the best thing for the podcast and also for our sanity. I mean, I love TOG. I also love Fourth Wing. So you can see why I'm a little conflicted.
Yeah, it's a hard decision, but it would really help if we know where the audience is at. So, all right, that is all for housekeeping. And let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report for our chapter summaries, and then we will dive into an analysis and offer theories for each chapter. And finally, we will share our favorite moments. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Okay.
Unhappily.
Unhappily. The most unhappy I've ever been. Okay, these were so hard to write, guys, and I am so sorry if they were long. I did the best I could. Chapter 53. Buckle up, everybody, for what is quite possibly the most devastating chapter you will ever read. The Valg princes have taken control of Celaena's mind and are quite literally feeding on the feelings of anguish, despair, and hopelessness that she has carried with her for most of her life. She saw Nehemia's corpse, mangled and mutilated, and her parents' gray, lifeless bodies, their throats slit from ear to ear. The moment that darkness swept around her, it began eating away at the reckless rage that had compelled her to step out of the barrier. Here she was, in the dark, the silence was eternal, and she did not fight as the darkness swallowed her whole and dragged her down deep. The darkness had no end and no beginning. It was an abyss that she welcomed as she free fell into it. Perhaps this was hell, and this is what she deserved. As if it couldn't get any more devastating, Celaena was taken back to Endovier the day she was whipped within an inch of her life, only this time it wasn't the Overseer, it was Nehemia, and then Sam, and then a long line of people. So many lives she had taken or failed to protect, and so they whipped her, again, again, and again. She did not know how long she fell with them, the Valg princess, but then there was a roaring river below, and she knew she was at the bottom, the very bottom of her soul. Chapter 54. We are transported back in time to the events that led to the worst day of Aelin Galathynius' life. Trumpets and silence announced the arrival of the King of Adarlan to the great white palace that watched over all the people of Terrasen. Everyone was on edge except for Orlan. Only he had smiled at Aelin and told her how pretty she looked in her new dress. Aelin immediately hated the King of Adarlan. As they sat down to a lavish but tense feast, Aelin couldn't help but notice how neatly Dorian, the crown prince, was eating. So cleanly, in fact, she told him, "You eat like a fine lady." And that was the only funny thing to happen in this chapter. Aelin's head started to pound, and the pain rapidly became so intense it was debilitating. She told her mother she didn't feel well, and things escalated quickly. Aelin felt a blast of pain and a wriggling, squirming worm of darkness in her mind. Her magic thrashed, trying to burn it away as she screamed, "Get it out!" The pillar of flame grew hotter and hotter, and then water. A wall of water crashing down on her, drowning her, until there was no air for her flame, only water. The King of Adarlan looked at her and smiled. Aelin couldn't shake the feeling of that horrible, dark worm invading her mind, and so her parents decided to take her to the country manor, a 2 days ride away. For the next few days, things were tense, and Aelin passed her time with Lady Marian, who would read her stories and brush her hair and tell her stories of her home and parents. One evening, Evelyn came to check on Aelin, who was still having trouble sleeping, and she told her that she had a gift for her that would help keep her safe, always. Aelin's eyes widened as her mother offered her the amulet of Orinth. The heirloom was honored above all others of their house. Evelyn placed the amulet over Aelin's head and told her to wear it always and know that she was loved. Go ahead and get your box of tissues now because it does not get better, my friends. It does not get better. She lost the amulet the very next night. Aelin awoke to the sound of a storm. She decided to seek comfort with their parents, so she crawled into their bed, noticing a smell of reeking copper and iron that did not sit well with her. It was to that scent that she awoke when the maid screamed. Without hesitating, Lady Marian scooped Aelin into her arms and held her and tried to reassure her that help was on the way. But help didn't come. Instead, they heard a lone horse and someone make their way into the front door of the manor. Marian pulled them under the table in a flash, and she began to give Aelin instructions. She told her to run for the footbridge on the river and to go to the empty farmhouse down the road and hide until someone she recognized and trusted came, and she was to run as fast as she could, and no matter what, was not to stop or look back. But Aelin did look back, and what she saw was too horrible and too tragic to put into words. And then she ran as fast as her little legs could carry her. The man didn't bother to be quiet as he flung open the door and mounted his horse, galloping towards her. The man was so close she could feel the breath of his horse hot on her neck, but there was the bridge. So close, all she had to do was leap. But when she leapt, there was no bridge, just thin air, and then she was falling. He had cut the bridge. It was her only thought as she plummeted into the icy water and was pulled under. And as they say, the rest was history. Erebin found her on the banks of the frozen river, and she began her new life as a member of the Assassin's Guild. Back to the present, Celaena clung to the ground. She did not know how long she lay there, but a small, smooth hand slid toward her. It was a young Aelin Galathynius reaching for her, telling her to get up. And then there was Sam and Nehemia and her parents and her uncle and Lady Marian, all smiling faintly and telling her to get up. One by one, like shadows emerging from the mist, they appeared, the faces of the people that she had loved with her heart of wildfire. And then there was a tremor in the darkness, and their faces turned cold, and they said all the things Celaena had always feared were true about herself. Traitor, murderer, liar, thief, coward. But she had loved these people fiercely, and when they vanished like smoke, only young Aelin was lying beside her. And in that moment, she realized that she was not in hell, but on earth. The earth on which her kingdom lay, her people waiting for her to return. She was not afraid. She would not let that light go out. She would remake the world and remake it for them, those she had loved with this glorious, burning heart. Celaena reached across the earth between them and brushed her fingers against Aelin's and arose. I did not cry. I wanted to, but I did not cry. Not yet. By the way, guys, that was the longest chapter in the book, just so you know. Chapter 55. The barrier fell, but the darkness did not advance over the wardstones because the Vogue Princess had won a far greater prize than some demi-fame. Gavriel and Lorcan continued to restrain Rowan from trying to get to Aelin. Rowan began hearing Lyria's voice screaming for mercy, and it was only Gavriel and Lorcan's restraints that held him at bay. He tried to remind himself that Lyria's voice wasn't real. A rumbling shook the earth, and some power was surging, a behemoth rising from the deep. A flame erupted from the wall of darkness, vibrant as a red opal. Aelin was on fire. Glorious, beautiful fire. And before Rowan could even take a step, she grabbed two of the creatures by their flawless faces and burned them into cinders. Celaena smiled at Rowan, but there was an exhaustion on her face, and a very real burnout was approaching. Without hesitation, Rowan drew his dagger and sliced his palm open. Rowan reached her and extended his palm. She took it without hesitation. She knew it would work. She had suspected it for some time now. They were Caranon. Aelin looked at Rowan and said, "To whatever end?" He nodded, and she joined hands with him, blood to blood, soul to soul, and then he whispered, "I claim you too, Aelin Galathynius." I'm sorry, you're not going to get emotional about this, and not Lady Marian, okay, you heartless monster.
That's not heartless. It's just romantic.
Get your priorities in line, Lorraine.
I'm choosing to focus on the positive, okay? We're moving forward.
The wave of blackness descended upon them, but this was not the end. This was not her end. She crammed the lights down their throats, burning them from the inside out. But before Narok was truly gone, he sent her a glimpse of the future. So real, it was only her grip on Rowan that kept her anchored, and just as quickly it was gone. When the light and flames receded, all that remained of Narok and the vow were 4 wordstone collars steaming in the wet grass. Chapter 56. Dorian startled Sorsha as he popped his head into her room unannounced. Dorian was on his A-game in the romance department, and after some flirting, the two worked together in silence. It was not until they heard a cough from the doorway that they noticed Chaol standing there. Chaol quietly shut the door and told Dorian, "You were right." Chaol asked for Dorian's help, and in exchange for agreeing, Dorian made him explain everything, and so Chaol did. The magic, the word keys, the 3 towers, all of it. Later on, Chaol had everything ready for his experiment. 3 crystals with red sand from the Red Desert, connecting them in the shape of a triangle with a bowl of water in the center. He asked Dorian to focus his magic and direct the power to each crystal, completing the triangle, and then finally freezing the water in the middle. Dorian concentrated all of his energy and began sweating immediately. But the crystals lit up, each one connecting to the other, and slowly but surely, the water began to freeze. Dorian quickly realized this is how his father was able to freeze magic over a decade ago, and he and Chaol discussed the towers and the possibility of destroying one to finally end the freeze on magic and Aurelia. But the conversation takes a turn towards the sentimental. Dorian cuts Chaol off before he can continue, telling him that this wasn't the time. As Dorian departed, he shared this simple truth. Even if he could, he wouldn't go back to things the way they were. All of this change was good, and Chaol shouldn't fear it. Dorian left, and Chaol opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was too stunned. When Dorian had spoken, it hadn't been a prince who looked at him. It had been a king. Chapter 57. Celaena slept for 2 days, and when she awoke, the blood and gore was cleaned away, the soldiers buried, and Rowan had hidden the 4 wordstone collars somewhere in the woods. After some light bullying, Rowan finally agreed to let Celaena out of the fortress to go for a walk in the woods. As they were leaving, Gavriel was waiting for them at the back gate. They said their goodbyes, and Gavriel warned them to be careful when they faced Maeve. Rowan and Celaena stopped at the forest pool, and Rowan told her that she had very publicly drawn a line in the sand against the King of Adarlan, and there was no turning back now. Celaena thought on Rowan's words, worrying about having to return to Aurelia alone, and wished she could offer Rowan some kind of protection, like the amulet of Orinth she had lost so long ago. And that's when it hit her. She knew where the 3rd word key was. It had been around her neck the night she ended up in that frozen river. Unable to tell Rowan this epiphany, she instead told him her story, the story of Aelin Ashryver Galathynius. It was a long story, and sometimes she grew quiet and cried, and during those times, Rowan leaned over to wipe away her tears. When she finished, she didn't know why she did it, but she placed an open palm over the pool, and slowly a droplet of water rose from the surface into her cupped palm, and it meant something so big she could not put words to it, to feel her mother smiling at her from realms away. After a week of regaining her strength, it was time to say goodbye to her friends at Mistward and head to Dornell. As she prepared to leave, she peered into the mirror and stopped dead. She had changed. No longer did a sad, broken girl stare at her. Instead, a woman was smiling back at her, beautiful for every scar and imperfection and mark of survival. They said their goodbyes and disappeared into the trees, to Dornell and to Maeve. At last. Chapter 58. Adie, Ren, and Chaol gathered at the apartment to go over the plan for Ren's departure, but were interrupted by the sound of feet thundering up the stairs. Thankfully, it was just Murtaugh. He informed them that the news was spreading like wildfire. Get it? Get it? I'm going to use that so many times for the rest of the series, so just get used to it. News of what Aelin had done in Wendlin and how she'd used her magic to defeat General Narok and his forces. Because of the news, they changed their plan. Fearing the king would try to stifle the spread, it was decided that Murtaugh and his riders would leave immediately. As he mounted his horse, Chaol told him to send word to Eelway and tell them it was time to fight back. Murtaugh and his riders spread the news across all of Aurelia, across the White Fangs and the Runes, all the way to the Western Wastes, to the deserted peninsula and the oasis fortress of the Silent Assassins. And for every town they told, every tavern and secret meeting, more riders went out. More and more until there was not a road they had not covered, until there was not one soul who did not know that Aelin Ashryver Galathynius was alive and was willing to stand against Adarlan. The king of Adarlan was in a rage. As a matter of fact, he was throwing a big crybaby temper tantrum. But Dorian was filled with hope. Hope at the promise of Celaena's return and what she had been able to accomplish. So Dorian let his father rage. He sat through the meetings, hiding his revulsion and horror. He did it for Sorsha and for the promise of someday, perhaps, not having to hide what and who he was. And when Celaena returned, then they would set about changing the world together.
Together.
And that concludes the book report. And I will give myself an A++ if I do say so myself. I'm going to grade myself.
Yes. Thank you for those summaries. They were so heartfelt. Very touching.
There was
very
so
well
much
written.
good writing. I know. I should be a writer. Just kidding. I was just using what Sarah J. Maas already wrote.
It takes talent, though, to weave it all together again, outside of the book. So,
yeah, I'm pretty sure I put way too much in there. Oh, thank you. I'm pretty sure I put way too much in there, but it was just all so good. I'm like, okay, well, I can't skip this. This is so heartfelt. This is so gut-wrenching. This is so emotional.
Hopefully everybody enjoyed it. And if you didn't, too bad, because it happened anyway. All right. So moving on from the book report, let's get into the analysis. And we are testing out a new format a little bit. So I can indeed see that Addison has some overarching thoughts to share with us today. And I have some commentary to add, but Addison, go ahead.
I like that you added the header plus Lorraine's additional commentary. When I logged in, I was like, oh my God. All right. Wow. I have so many thoughts about this set of chapters. Obviously, we're going to do a whole episode about it, but to try to sort of sum up like a broader theme, I have two main things. The first is I think that this set of chapters is probably the best writing I've read in the TOG series so far, and possibly in all of the Massverse. There are still a few other chapters from her other series that are pretty competitive that I have in mind. Obviously, I won't go into those. If you know, you know. But when I was rereading this and taking my notes, I just could not get over the writing. I basically just wanted to copy down whole pages from my favorite quotes because it was just so good. There was so much description and messages of hope and empowerment and love and growth. And it was just so good. I was crying all the time, goosebumps all the time. I don't know. I loved it. I can't necessarily say it was my favorite set of chapters in terms of just really exciting to read, but from an emotional perspective and a writing perspective, for sure, I think that this was some of the best. And then for almost 4 entire books and hundreds of hours of reading, note-taking, recording, editing, etc., I have been wishing, and those of you that have been listening to us for a long time know, we have been begging, screaming, crying for the story of what happened the day that Terrasen fell and the day Aelin's parents died. And now that I finally know, I finally got what I was asking for, I wish I didn't. I will not lie. There's a high probability I will cry in this episode. I wish I had a better word than devastating, but I can't think of a better one. And it is just devastating. It fucked me up. Okay. It fucked me up good. To be honest, I actually felt a little nervous about this recording. And I don't think I've gotten nervous in a recording since, I don't know, our first like 2 or 3 episodes. And I feel a little nervous. I don't know. I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. I really don't want to cry. It's okay for other people to cry. I just don't want to cry.
I've cried already. I cried when we were talking about Rhaenys.
I know. I was thinking about that and House of the Dragon. Yeah, I know. And it came out of nowhere and I was like, oh my God, I was so upset. I know. I'm going to try really hard to hold it together.
I don't think of it as like a nerve-wracking thing. I think of it as a good thing because it means that you really connected with the book and it had an impact on you.
Yes. So. And I love that for other people, but I cry on the inside like a winner. Okay.
Like a what?
Like a winner. Cry on the inside like a winner. You've never heard that?
No.
Oh my God. Why do I have to educate you on pop culture references all the time?
Because your pop culture references are clearly not of this time.
What are you talking about? Everyone knows that.
Wait, what is it from?
I don't even know, actually.
In all fairness, my pop culture references tend to be about TikTok. I don't know what that means about me, but
I don't know if this is like the original origin, but it's from the movie The Other Woman, which is a hilarious movie, by the way, if you guys have never seen it.
Oh,
well, anyways, cry on the inside like a winner. That's me. Okay.
Well, I agreed that this was definitely a very devastating set of chapters. The truth of that night is, I mean, literally from a nightmare, and it explains why Celaena has nightmares about it. But I actually felt hopeful and inspired by the set of chapters because it is a huge turning point in the trajectory of the story moving forward. Aelin has finally overcome her fear and accepted herself and her past, so now she's ready to face whatever the king has with full force. Most importantly, she is no longer alone. She has Rowan, Dorian, Chaol, and Adian in a full rebellion working behind the scenes and alongside her, and that really makes my heart happy because I know there's so much still to overcome, and I'm sure there's going to be many obstacles moving forward. But for now, I feel renewed with optimism and knowing that the rebellion against the king is gaining some momentum again and that Aelin is back, baby.
Well, I'm glad one of us feels optimism because I'm not feeling it, Lorraine. I'm not feeling good.
I want a sweet treat.
I want a sweet treat. I do. That would really help. I know, just like, where's my kid's Halloween candy bucket? Because Mama's going to need something to make it through this episode, okay?
I'm surprised you haven't rated it yet. That's the first thing I would do if I had kids.
Oh,
Halloween candy.
multiple times I've rated it, obviously. But see, you know what? I mean, my kids are pretty young. They're 3 and 5. But my kids, man, I feel like they have this weird mental inventory because I'll take 2 little pieces. Even my 3-year-old would be like, Mommy, did you take my candy? And I'm like,
No, absolutely not.
Did I borrow some of it? Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
You mean my candy because I took you trick-or-treating.
Thank you. Okay. No, my 3-year-old's so funny because, she asked me, she would just eat the whole bucket if I let her, right? And so I don't want to like restrict them so much that they feel like, oh, candy, But I am like, no, we can't have candy for breakfast. I'm sorry. That's the boundary, right?
Yeah.
But she's figured out, she's like, Mommy, do you want to share this? And if she shares it with me, then she gets more candy. So she just offers to share her candy with me like all day, every day. And it's so cute and hard to resist.
I was going to say, that's very adorable and very sweet, but very also smart. Very sneaky.
Very sneaky, yes. And she does this new thing where she comes up to me and she puts her hands up and she's like, Mommy, this is up to you. May we please have a little bit more candy? And something about this is up to you. I don't know why. I'm like, everything in this house is up to me, honey. Literally everything. But it's so cute when she says it. I don't know. They're funny.
She's got you.
She does, man. She really does.
Anyways, to get back on track, we're going to start with our analysis for chapter 53.
So in the opening of this chapter, Celaena is being forced to relive her most horrible memories about the Valg Princess. We know that they quite literally feed on the agony and misery their victims have experienced. And there's a quote that I feel like summarizes this pretty well. It also, I think, speaks to her character and something we've already intuited about her by this point in the series, but does a nice job of summing it up. It says, 2 beds, 2 fractures in her soul, cracks through which the abyss had come pouring in long before the Valg Princess had ever seized her. And in this quote, the 2 beds they're referring to, I know, oh my God, I know. The 2 beds that they're referring to are
the 2 beds referring to are.
Thank you. Okay, it is are. You know when you get are and is mixed up and you're just like,
plural versus singular subjects.
Thank you, Mrs. Lorraine.
4th grade reading and writing.
Yeah, baby. But the 2 beds are in reference to where she found her parents and where she found Nehemia. I think this quote is just so heartbreaking and it really shows the pain and grief that Celaena has been experiencing since a very young age and basically for her entire life.
Yeah, she's carried that pain with her for a long time, and it's clear from her memories that Celaena feels an enormous amount of guilt and rage. And she believes that she deserves this end by the Valg Princess, something that we have discussed many times before. And the quote that I liked from this section says, that darkness had swept around her. It began eating away at the reckless rage that had compelled her to step out of the barrier. Here in the dark, the silence was complete, eternal.
Oh, when you start throwing the word eternal in there, I get real anxious real fast. But I agree completely. And I think this is especially evident by the fact that Celaena repeatedly hears Nehemia calling her a coward. I know what the word coward means, but it's been a really long time since I've actually looked at the actual definition of what a coward is. And basically, it is someone who is too afraid to act. This is why it affects Celaena so much, because she hates herself because she was afraid. Even though she was a little girl when her parents died and when Nehemia was murdered, she was very reasonably afraid of the king. But I think it just sticks with her because basically her whole life she's been afraid, which we know is a very reasonable feeling. But for her, I think she just feels a lot of guilt and regret over her actions and feeling that fear.
Mm-hmm.
As the darkness continues to ripple around Celaena, she sees flashes of images of her worst memories. And one of the memories that she sees is Nehemia's mutilated body, and she remembers some of the last words she spoke to Nehemia. Honestly, I kind of forget that the last words spoken were said in anger. And Celaena remembers them specifically. It says, "When your people are lying dead around you, don't come crying to me." Which, ooh, yeah, yikes. I think I would be pretty broken up too if those were some of the last words I spoke to my best friend before she was brutally murdered. So I get why that haunts her.
Oh my gosh, yes. And not only was that their last conversation, but combined with the fact that her opportunity to make things right for Nehemia was taken away from her when the king of Waterland murdered all the slaves in Endovir and Calcula. This all just leaves her feeling as if she was a waste of space and breath, a stain on the world unworthy of her birthright, which is heartbreaking.
Absolutely devastating. That's something I hadn't really considered, is that we know that she has many paths for redemption. And honestly, she doesn't even need to be redeemed. But in her mind, this was her way, right? This is a promise she made to Nehemia to restore her father's crown and free her people. And you have to remember that a lot of the slaves, especially in Endovir, are people of Terrasen. And so it makes sense that this would sort of send her on another spiral, because she felt that this was her way to make things right. And now that has been taken away from her. And not only that, but now she's taking on the burden of, I was too late. If only I would have, sprung into action sooner. And so I think her grief and her guilt just continues to compound as we progress throughout the story. So it ain't looking good for our girl. It ain't looking good. We then transition to another waking nightmare. Celaena is back in Endovir the day she was whipped, but this time it's not the overseer. Instead, it's Nehemia and Sam whipping her, which, woo, man, did not see that coming. And boy, was I not prepared. I was not freaking prepared. It was honestly devastating to read. It was just a manifestation of all of Celaena's grief and self-loathing, quite literally coming to life. I think she truly does carry the weight of the world on her shoulders and takes the personal responsibility for basically everything bad that has ever happened in the world, ever, which she needs to go to therapy. She needs to work on that. I think the way it's described is, beautiful isn't really the right word, very tragically beautiful, I guess. And it says, Sam and Nehemia took turns, and a line of people formed behind them, waiting for what they deserved as payment for what she had failed to do. Such a long line of people, so many lives that she had taken or failed to protect, again, again, again. And I think this really just speaks to the idea that she feels that she has not just failed her parents or Sam or Nehemia, but in a way, everyone, right? All the people of Terrasen, anybody that she's ever killed during her long career as an assassin, basically anyone she's ever come into contact with, I think she feels a personal responsibility for.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this transition to her friends hurting her and the quote you just read is the manifestation of her belief that she should be punished for failing everyone that she loved and cared about, which is just not true. She did nothing wrong, but she had been raised to lead people and then was forced to abandon them because of what the king had done, something we obviously learn about in the next chapter. And I fucking hate that. I hate that so much, that she blames herself for something she never did and she didn't have any control over. So
I know, especially when you
just
remember
waiting for that redemption.
Especially when you remember that she was literally 8 years old. She was like in second grade. Okay, I want you to think about the last little kid you met. Like, what was an 8-year-old going to do? And the fact that she carried that around for all of her formative period, it just does not feel good. It's not feeling good. Okay.
Literally all I have to say is damn. It's soul crushing to know that she believes she deserves to just die at the hands of these Valg. There's really not much that I can say that accurately describes the feeling I had from reading these chapters. But I did have to ask, do you think we are getting the truest form of the emotion and pain that Celaena feels, or do you think there is some warping going on from the Valg's influence? Remember, we had this discussion in relation to Dorian and his seemingly heightened emotional states that we had felt were unusual for him, like back at the beginning when we were like first thinking about where he was coming from. We wondered if there was an exaggeration of feelings and emotions when exposed to the dark magic. I think in Celaena's case, she does really feel these emotions, but I do kind of feel like maybe there's a leaning into it or an exaggeration or heightening of these emotions because of the Valg. Like they're the ones who are shaping those forms into Nehemia and Sam. Like now whipping her instead of just the memory of it. Are they distorting it to make it even worse, to heighten and exaggerate an emotion that she already has, but to then continue that feeling so that they can keep feeding off of her? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's a really good call out and connection that I had not considered yet. My gut reaction to your question is that no, this really is a real reflection of the absolute soul-crushing devastation that Celaena feels every single day. And I only say that because that's been her story since day one, since the day we met her, way back where our timeline starts is the assassin and the pirate lord. And I think it started with the day her parents died and Terrasen fell, and then all the lives she started taking when she became an assassin. And I think it's been building and building and building for so long. I think maybe there's a little bit in that because the Valg have isolated her in her worst nightmare, that it's allowing her mind to physically create the manifestation of that, which would be the line of people whipping her in Dovir. It's combining all the worst things that have ever happened to her. The people she loves hurting her, being physically hurt, especially the way she's being hurt. She's strapped to a table, naked, vulnerable, shamed. And so I don't think they're heightening her emotions. I think they're just giving her mind the space it needs to create a physical representation of those devastated feelings.
Well, that ends chapter 53. Moving on to chapter 54, the big, emotional, sad, tragic, devastating, heart-wrenching chapter.
Yep. Nothing but heartbreak here. Nothing but heartbreak. If you're looking for something happy, go somewhere else.
First and foremost, we've talked about this a lot, but I love young Aelin and Adian's friendship. I think it's hilarious that they are spying on everyone from above, and Adian's making commentary calling Dorian a sniveling son. But like simultaneously, they're both dressed to their very best to be impressive. And, you know, Aelin's got her pressed curls and her pretty dress, and it's just so Aelin. And it's cute to know that part of her has always been the same. She's always been just a little princess at heart. So.
I know. I would love some more POV chapters from young Adian and Aelin, because all of the little brief snippets that we've gotten of them are so funny. Like when Adian says rat's balls, I'm like, what? Who says that? And Lady Marianne's like, Adian.
Yeah.
It's so funny. He's such a 13-year-old, you know, he just reeks of it. I liked when it said, no one had told her anything about this visit, but she knew it was important because even Adian was wearing clean clothes, a crown, and a new dagger. And that's just so funny to me, because in real life, if I start doing my hair and makeup or, you know, switch out of my yoga pants, my husband is like, whoa, is the queen coming or something? Is there something really important going on? And I just feel like it's kind of the same thing, right? For Adian to put on clean clothes, she was like, oh shit, this is like really important. I just think that's really funny. But at the same time, I also think it's interesting the way the mood is described as the King of Otterland arrives. It's described as the whole court snarly and wearing far more weapons than usual. And I think this really just shows how serious and potentially dangerous this visit is for Terrasen. We don't know a lot about what the world looked like before the king took over things, but I think it's safe to assume, just based on context and these little descriptions we get, that there was a lot of fear and uncertainty surrounding the King of Adarlan, and him coming to visit was a really big deal for a variety of reasons. The fact that they're all strapping on extra weapons, even when Aelin says she keeps bumping into Lady Marion's daggers strapped to her thighs, I'm like, damn, even your nursemaid, they got daggers strapped on, you know? So pretty serious visit, and we see why. We also finally get officially introduced to Lady Marion, and if you recall, she has only been mentioned twice in our story so far. The first time is when Murtaugh, Ren, and Aedion are discussing potential allies, and Murtaugh says, "You know what happened to Lady Marion, but we never learned what happened to Elide." At the time, I remember when we read that, the phrasing seems to indicate that something bad happened to Marion because it kind of comes out in an ominous way. But I had no idea how bad what happened to her would be. It's even worse than I possibly could have imagined. So, yep, did not feel good. But now we do know what happened to Lady Marion, and it makes sense the way it was phrased, why it is the way it is. The second time is in Aelin's memory scene that took place after she burned the books in the library, and her mother and father are discussing whether they should send her to school or not. Marion is mentioned just in passing, and it's just said that Cal and Marion have been talking about sending Elide to school next year, and we'll talk more about Elide when we get there, but we really didn't know a lot about Marion until this chapter, and then we get a lot of Marion, including the end of Marion. I have this sense and this feeling that Marion, in a way, is a critically important character, even though we'll never have any real FaceTime with her because of her sacrifice and how it shaped Aelin. I don't know why, but I just had this feeling at the very end, or in some really meaningful way, Aelin will find a way to do something in honor of her, like erect a memorial or some kind of gesture to honor her memory. It's just like a gut feeling I have about who Aelin is and Marion and their relationship. But I know I've said this so many times. It's just so sad. It's so
I know.
sad.
I think all the events that took place with Marion and just other members of the court definitely demonstrates how committed they all were and how honorable everyone is in Terrasen, and why it was especially hard for Aelin over the past 10 years to rectify the fact that she was not fulfilling her duty, because everybody in her court had fulfilled their duties, literally sacrificing themselves to make sure that she stayed alive. That is the ultimate thing that anybody can do, right? And so it makes so much sense why she tried so hard to just push that memory away and lock it away, because it was too hard and too emotionally damaging for her to process. So,
yeah. Me too.
So one of the first events to occur in this chapter is Lady Marion ushering Aelin and Aedion from the balcony they were observing to the dais to meet with the King of Adarlan. And behind her stood a young and shy Elide. In this chapter, we learn a little bit more about Elide, and this is the third time that Elide has been mentioned, so it's safe to assume that she's going to come into play at some point. To give a brief refresher on Elide, we first learned about her in chapter 24 when Ren and Murtaugh were filling Aedion in on what their life had been like for the past 10 years. Lady Marion was married to Lord Cal Lochen, former Lord of Parenth, who had been executed. No one had known what had happened to Elide after Lord Cal and Lady Marion's deaths. Many children had disappeared in the initial few weeks after Terrasen fell. We also learned that Elide was 1 year younger than Aelin, and in this chapter, 54, we learn a little bit more about Elide's personality. She was quiet and breakable, according to Aelin, and had night black hair and onyx-colored eyes. The King of Adarlan enters into the dais for introductions, and then everyone sits down for dinner. Everyone in Terrasen, as we just stated, is very tense, and Aelin recalls hating everything about him, stating she hated his scarred brutish face and furs, hated the way he ignored his dark-haired son, who stood like a pretty doll beside him, his manners so elegant and graceful, his pale hands like little birds as they moved. And I thought the line about Dorian's elegance in hands moving like little birds was interesting, because now that we know that shifting is a power amongst magical beings, I wonder if this is a small indication of an ability Dorian will have later. Will he develop shifting and be able to shift into a bird? You thought I was going to say something like so serious and so observant, but no, I'm bringing up shifting.
Oh my God. Okay, so honestly, my gut reaction is like, Lorraine, that's stupid. Okay, that's stupid. But Sarah J. Maas is so masterful at her foreshadowing and Easter egg descriptions, especially in this series. I can't tell you how often I read something and I'm like, oh, that was referenced way back when, or this was alluded to, or, whatever. And I try my best to connect them all as I do my notes. And I'm sure there are plenty that I miss. And so on the one hand, I'm like, Lorraine, stop. That's terrible. But on the other hand, I'm like, you know what? Nothing's off the table. Okay. Who knows? Very possibly. Although I will say, and evidence is to sort of push back against that. The way his power is described is just like pure power that he can shift to his will. So it doesn't seem like he'll have shifting abilities. But I mean, who knows? Dorian has basically done no exploration into his power. So maybe he can shift. I don't know.
I just keep thinking about Maeve and her different forms, quote unquote, and what that means. And the fact that we've learned that shifting is separate from the fact that Fae can shift into an animal, right? Like there's two different types of shifting going on. And so, yeah, I'm not going to remove it from the table yet. I realize that it's a little bit of a stretch, but we just don't know. The possibilities really are endless about Dorian and his power because we don't know enough, but we do know that he's very powerful. And so I'm just going to throw it out there for now and we'll see what happens. I also really liked how when they begin to eat and all the kids are seated at the end of the table, Aelin takes note of how lonely and ignored Dorian seemed to be by his father and court. She felt Dorian ate beautifully compared to her, and especially Adian. And since the kids were being ignored anyway, she attempts to make conversation by stating, "You eat like a fine lady. You do not need to cut your bread with a fork and knife."
I know. And I love I think it's Quinn, one of her father's court. Even he's like, I just picture him like taking a drink and like trying not to laugh. And it's so funny. And then I just picture Adian covered in crumbs, chicken bones everywhere, just doing the most.
Yep. I felt like the conversation that follows is hilarious because one, Aelin is attempting to play laid back and cool despite her dressing her very best and is 100% putting on airs. And two,
absolutely.
She asked Dorian if they want to be friends, which is so touching because it was so pure and innocent. And we know that friendship has been a huge thing for Aelin since all the kids were scared of her when she was younger and she didn't have anyone except Adian. And so I love that eventually everything comes full circle later and her and Dorian do end up becoming friends,
Oh, I hadn't thought about that, especially because she's so lonely. She recognizes it when she sees it on someone else. Oh, that's so sad and sweet at the same time. Oh,
crying emoji.
Crying. Except for I cry on the inside like a winner, so maybe not. I also loved when Aelin tells Dorian that he could be her friend, and Dorian responds with, "I have a friend. He is to be Lord of Aniel someday, and the fiercest warrior in the land." And I thought this was just a cute little Easter egg because clearly he's talking about Chaol here. You know that they've been friends since they were kids, but it's just cute. It's just cute that he's like, I already have a friend. He's the best. I think it's also important to note that as she's talking to Dorian, it is quickly mentioned that a faint pounding was starting in her head. And even on the first reread, I was like, dark magic alert. Like, we have discussed that so many times. How there's a strong correlation between the proximity to the king and his dark magic and getting a headache. That came up like book 1 with Keltane. And so I just thought that was important to note here because it happens pretty quickly, but it's foreshadowing for what is about to occur. And it ain't good.
Nope. And this takes us into our discussion of the big kahuna moment when the fucking king tries to wriggle into Aelin's mind. So first off, again, I was baffled by this. I just wasn't expecting that he tried to influence Aelin's mind. But in retrospect, it makes so much sense because she was so terrified and has continued to be so terrified of the king. And you just always had this question of like, besides his cruelty, which is pretty on par for a stereotypical tyrant king, one of my questions was, what did he actually do to her? And so this answers that question. The king's manipulation starts off as a feeling of red-hot pain and a headache. Soon she is burning up as her magic surges and fights back against the king's magic, which is described as a worm of darkness pushing its way in. Her magic roiled, thrashing, trying to get it out, to burn it up, to save them both. And after she fires her blue flame accidentally, she also thinks the worm would latch into her mind and never let go, and it seems to work the walls of her mind. So my question to you, Addison, is this. What do you think the king was doing with his magic to her? We know later that all of this was intentional by him to cause panic within Orlan's court and separate the family. But I wonder what he would have done had he successfully infiltrated her mind. Like, was he trying to get her memories or trying to influence her mind ultimately? Because it seems like she counteracted it, right? That was like the whole thing with her magic reacting against it. It read like she could feel that he was trying to get into her mind, but her magic was fighting it. Her will was fighting against whatever it is. And it was trying to keep her safe and keep him from ultimately actually getting in.
So there's two different ways you can read that, right? The first is just kind of the obvious, easy explanation is that he was just trying to mess with her to get her to have a big magical reaction to start the chain of events he needed so that he could carry out his plan. That's the easy kind of face value answer. Honestly, I don't know enough about the king's capabilities to really suss out what his intention may have been. It may have been both, right? I think it's very possible that maybe he was trying to get some kind of access to her memories, or maybe get a feel for her actual level of power, sort of assess a threat. Because even though she was 8, it's described very clearly that all of Aurelia knew that she had extreme power, right? That one emissary from Melisande comes because he's trying to see what kind of threat she may be. And so it's very possible that he was just trying to get a feel for her actual power level, her capability. So yeah, it could be a combination of those things, one or the other. But I think mostly I took it at face value that he was just trying to get her to react in a magical way to start the chain of events he needed.
That's kind of where I was leaning to, but I was just curious if he had an ulterior motive. I wouldn't be surprised if the king did, but it seems like for the most part, he was just trying to incite a reaction. Aelin also recalls that the King of Adarlan distinctly looked at her 3 times throughout this meeting. And I don't know why, but 3 made me think of the 3 obsidian constructions he's made to get rid of magic. It just briefly made me wonder if there's something significant about 3. I don't know exactly what it is, but it was just a brief thought. Now, when he looks at her for the second time, they are seated for dinner, and it was as if he could see through her bones. We've debated about whether the King of Adarlan recognized Celaena when she was older, and if the king can sense something within her that makes her unique. As we learn later about the mark on her brow glowing when she fights back against the vow, it does make me more convinced that he would remember her. Maybe not by her physical features, but by this energy and power within her that he can sense even after he got rid of magic. Because Aelin is special. There is no doubt about that. Her role in destroying the evil Valak forces and the king is going to be crucial. And so it's getting harder and harder for me to believe that the king has no inkling of who she is when she's older.
I mean, I agree in the sense of your logic is sound, but there's just no way, if he even got a whiff of a suspicion, that he wouldn't have had her killed immediately. I mean, there was a slave uprising and he was like, I know what I'll do. I'll kill all the slaves, right?
Sure.
He goes nuclear every time. No hesitation about killing even the hint of a whisper of a threat. And so I just feel like Aelin Galathynius, even if he thought that she was just spreading the word of discontent, I feel like he would have had her killed. And so it's really hard for me to think that he did and just didn't do anything. I don't know. It's a little bit of a confusing subject for me.
I agree. I guess we just have to keep reading. So the next thing I briefly wanted to discuss is the 4th Valak prince in Narok's body that says, "You found me a prize that will interest our liege. Do not waste her sips only," when Celaena briefly comes out of her memory. Obviously, this indicates that these princes are not the top head honcho. So who is above them? Who are they referring to? Could it be Erewhon? Are they talking about the King of Adarlan? I just have questions about the hierarchy of the Valg.
You and your head honcho. You're always wanting to know who the head honcho is. Yeah.
Yes.
I wondered this too. When you say liege, it always makes me think of royalty. So my first reaction was like, oh, it's the king, their liege. But I also kind of feel like the Valg princes don't really answer to the King of Adarlan. They're sort of beholden to him because he holds quite literally the key that allows them in and out of Aurelia. But I feel like once the Valg princes found a way to break free and not need the King of Adarlan, they would waste him so fast. They would destroy him.
That's what I keep thinking.
So it does make me wonder if in the larger context, when you zoom out on all the evil in Aurelia, if there is like a higher evil being or evil power. So it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, really makes you wonder. Next, we go back into her memory of that day, and Celaena notes that her mother believed the dinner incident had been an attack from Maeve because, quote, no one else could do anything like that or know that such a demonstration in front of the King of Adarlan would be detrimental. Maeve is a baddie bad, okay?
We'll die on this hill. We'll die on this hill.
We don't have enough evidence to like fully support this, but you just feel it in your bones. And the fact that Maeve has a power that presents similarly to what the King of Adarlan is doing, who is obviously using dark magic of the word keys, that is so suspicious. Why is her power similar? Is it because Maeve is connected to these word keys or the Valg? Or like, why would they think it was Maeve when it was actually the King of Adarlan? What actually is her power? Who is Maeve?
Okay, first of all, yes, Maeve is a baddie bad. I also thought it was funny that you said we don't have that much evidence because we basically have no evidence. There's zero evidence that Maeve is actually bad. It's just vibes only, but the vibes are strong. Okay, they're bad and they're strong. But I think the way it's worded this way is because the king banned magic in Adarlan basically the moment he ascended the throne. And he is not an inherently magical being, right? He is able to use magic because of word marks and his access to the word keys. And so I think it's reasonable for them to assume that it wouldn't be the king because they don't know that he can use magic. They don't know that he has access to that power. They were completely caught off guard. So the only kind of big bad that they know of that exists that has magic is Maeve. So it may just be like a process of elimination. It had to be Maeve, or it may also be an indication of what Maeve's power actually is. I could go either way on that.
Okay. See, yeah, my thing was more leaning towards the fact that they're calling out no one else could do anything like that. Knowing that they were picking up on the specific use case of what the magic was doing to Aelin, and they recognize that as something that Maeve is doing. Okay, well, why is it that Maeve's power presents so similarly to what the king did? You know, what's going on there is kind of where my mind was going when I was thinking about that. So, yeah.
The important thing is Maeve is a baddie bad. That's the important thing. And then before they go to the country manor, the last thing that is described is that even after Aelin's big explosion of magic, they tried to go back to normal, so to speak. And Evelyn and Ro make Aelin have tea with Dorian. I love this callback. So way back in chapter 22 of Calm, when Dorian is looking through the genealogical records to trace this magic, he comes across the Galathynius line, and he recalls a very hazy memory of meeting a young Aelin, and he thinks, the memory was hazy, but she had been a precocious wild girl and had sent her nasty, brutish older cousin on him in order to teach Dorian a lesson for spilling tea on her dress. And here we are actually seeing the actual event that inspired this thought play out. They have tea, and Dorian, his perfect manners falter, and he knocks over the teapot and it gets on Aelin's dress. And so, I just thought that was kind of funny to picture. And two, I love when there's a cross-series connection. This is why I always say your crazy theories. I'm like, she plants these Easter eggs way early on, and by the next book, you're like, whoa, this was foreshadowed way back then. So maybe Dorian is a damn bird. I don't know.
We just don't know. You never know.
Never say never, but I just love that little reference. And also just Aiden. I still cackle when I think about the library scene and he's like, we'll burn down that library. And you're like, whoa.
Yeah. You're like, that's aggressive. What are you doing?
Literally set the world on fire for her. Literally.
I know. That was a cute callback. So next we move into phase 2 of the recalling of Terrasen's fall when Celaena's parents take her to a separate manor. And I just have to say that I love Lady Marian, and it's so sad that she died. She was so honorable, and I understand how symbolic her sacrifice was.
I know. I know. I am 100% going to cry. Everyone go get your box of Kleenex and come back because you know what's coming. Well, and if you don't, you should pause here and go finish reading and then come back.
Yes, for sure. But something else that is very important to talk about first is the gift that Evelyn gives Aelin the night everything goes to shit. Her mother gives her an amulet, and we learn that this is the Amulet of Orinth. It's a family heirloom that has a cerulean front, a white stag carved of horn from King Brandon's horns, and a golden crown that has the, quote, immortal star that watched over them and pointed the way home to Terrasen. And then it also has words in a strange language that no one could remember. Before we get into the plot importance, this moment was touching to read. Her mother says to her, "It is a gift meant to be given to people in our family, those who need its guidance. Wear it now and know that you are loved, Fireheart. You are safe, and it is the strength of this that matters. This will lead you home."
And then she lost it.
I know, and then she freaking lost it. Girl. Ugh. Well, it wasn't her fault, but still. Remembering home and being loved has been a huge component of Aelin's struggle from the Assassin's Blade all the way through Calm. And I really love getting these scenes about her relationship with her parents because it's so evident that she really was loved. And it's heartbreaking to know that she had kind of forgotten that up until now and had been so consumed by rage and despair for so long. It's understandable for sure, but again, this transformation in Heir of Fire has been really crucial for Aelin's character, and I'm glad she's worked through that. To get back to the plot, this is the second special amulet that we know of in addition to the Eye of Elena, but by the word, it's a word key. And Daryl Arabin Hamill has it. Like, what the fuck?
The first and foremost, obligatory fuck Arabin Hamill. That piece of shit. Oh, God. Yes. So we will have a full discussion about the word key and Arabin having it and the implications of that when we get there. But let it just be known that when I read that, first of all, my jaw hit the floor. And second, I was like, finally, it's our time. We're going to have to go back and find out where Arabin Hamill is. What is he doing? And we're going to get some fucking revenge. And I am psyched. Not in this book. I'm pretty sure it'll be in Queen of Shadows. I don't think we'll have time to do the whole Arabin thing in this book. But finally.
That freaking weasel.
Weasel? That's such a good word to describe it. That ginger weasel. I actually hate that little ginger bitch.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, by later that night, Aelin awakes to a feeling of unnatural darkness and the wriggling, horrific thing pushing against her mind. Plus, it's accompanied by a strange smell that she recognizes now as the same smell she remembered from the drained Demi-Fae and the Barrow White Valg incident. She also hears a clopping of hooves outside as Lady Marian instructs her to run and then sacrifices herself to give Aelin time to get away.
Ooh, okay. I have a lot of feelings about this, as you guys can tell. I don't know if I'm just a big softie or it's because I have young children, but I'm going to try really hard not to cry. Every time I think about this moment when she's telling Aelin to run, I just can't stop thinking about what an hugely immense sacrifice this is because I can't do it. Oh, okay. You know, she just has to be thinking about her husband and her child, who she'll never see again.
Oh. Deep breaths.
I know. Woo. Oh, time to turn off the camera. But, man, I really thought I'd be okay. I thought I was just going to talk a big game and not really cry. But I just can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
I even wrote, damn it, I'm crying just writing this. So I didn't make it writing it. I didn't make it talking about it. But it's such an immense sacrifice because obviously she saves Aelin's life, but it's her saving a hope for a kingdom. It's a sacrifice that she made quite literally for an entire people. And I think that is what is so moving and devastating about it. I think that's what Aelin carries with her. It wasn't just her life for Aelin's life, right? It was for what Aelin represented, for a hope for a better world. And what did Aelin do with that? Nothing. I mean, up to this point, right? And so it gives so much context to her feelings about that as we progress through the story. So in chapter 45 of TOG, it's page 385 of the ebook if you want to go back and reread it. There is a very short section of the chapter that is a dream sequence of Celaena, and it describes this exact moment. She hears thundering hooves chasing her. She's running as fast as she can, trying to get to the bridge, and she's terrified. And I love that SJM has been setting us up for this from the very first book. And I remember at the time, I think we speculated, we thought this was a nightmare, or probably more of a memory, like a memory nightmare. And it was related to the night her parents were killed. And we finally have confirmation of that. And so it's just kind of cool that we were literally set up for this moment back in TOG. And then I also really liked the description of when she is trying to escape and gets stuck in the mud and the roots. And it says, tiny eyes in the dark, small fingers at the roots, heaving them up and up. Her foot slipped free and she was up again, unable to thank the little folk who had already vanished. And there have been several moments throughout the series where the little folk have come up way back in the beginning of TOG when they put the little white flowers in her tent. And then when she's making her way to Mistward with Rowan for the first time, and she sees all their little eyes and she whispers to them that the little folk in Aurelia still live. I just love that. This connection that Aelin has with the little folk. It seems that a lot of times they're probably kind of overlooked or forgotten, but they seem to have a special connection to Aelin. And so anytime that they come up, I don't know why, I just find that very touching.
Yeah, I agree. And I still do want to know what the little folk actually are, because they are connected to Aelin, but we really don't get any definition of what they really are or what their purpose is, I guess. I guess they're just other magical beings, but
I think they're just like smaller fairies. I think of them like little pixies or something. I mean, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah. So the quote from all of this that I think really summarizes the impact this event had on Aelin was this. That moment, Lady Marian had chosen a desperate hope for her kingdom over herself, over her husband and the daughter who would wait and wait for a return that would never come. That was the moment that had broken everything Aelin Galathynius had promised to be. And as she lay on the bottom of hell, she continues on to think that was the moment she could not face, had not faced, for even now she had known the enormity of that sacrifice. So this turns out to be the core of what has bothered Aelin so much about this event and why she's tried to bury the memory so deep. The idea that someone sacrificed their own life for someone who didn't end up doing what she was destined to be and do. I think she feels that Lady Marian and Nehemia had engaged in a, quote, worthless sacrifice for another, quote, unquote, monster. And I cannot imagine feeling the shame and guilt that she has carried for so long from something that, again, had not actually been her fault at all. We get the verbalization from Celaena herself about what this all actually meant for her.
That was a quote that just absolutely broke me. I feel like we have talked so much about Celaena and why she seems so broken, and just honestly speculating what the hell could have happened to her that was just so awful that made her the way she was. And I think at some point for me, there was so much pressure on this answer of why Celaena hated herself so much that honestly, I was kind of worried the answer was going to be a letdown. I was going to read it and be like, oh, this is why she's so broken. This is sad, but this doesn't explain her behavior. And I am devastated and happy at the same time. But I just think that SJM did an incredible job of writing this moment. It is so well written. And it gives me so much context for all of Celaena's actions up to this point. And I think that Lady Marian's sacrifice is worthy of the weight of the grief that Celaena has carried. Of course, I do not blame Aelin. She was literally a child. But I truly feel that I understand Aelin's character on a new fundamental level that I would not have if she had not done this moment the justice it deserved. I just think the importance of it cannot be understated. I'm just happy that it was worthy, honestly. I think there's a secondary part to understanding Aelin's character on a fundamental level, and that is this. She had taken Lady Marian's sacrifice and become a monster, almost as bad as the one who had murdered Lady Marian and her own family. That was why she could not did not go home. I've wondered about this a lot. I get at the time when it all happened, she was a child. But why did she not find the rebels? Why did she not find Aelin? Why did she not go to Terrasen when she was 14, 15, 16? I mean, I know at some point, obviously, current events, she was unable to, but she had opportunities. She could have found a way to get there. And I always wondered why she didn't. What kept her from doing that? Even in the beginning of this book, when she and Rowan are talking about Aelin, she says something like she'd never even had the courage to look up Aelin or do kind of any investigation into what his situation was because it was too hard for her. And I think this really sums up another lingering question that we have had about her. And now we know why. It's because she couldn't bear it. Not only did she feel guilt and grief and all of that, but she felt that she was just as bad as the person who killed her own family, right? She had taken Lady Marion's sacrifice, and not only did she not honor it, but she made the world worse with her choices. And I get why that would be really devastating to face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just can't even imagine.
I can't imagine either. I will say, in fairness, then she was picked up and found by Erebin Hamel, and
true. That didn't help matters.
I mean, we don't know how much Erebin ultimately knew about her when he found her. But obviously what his profession was and the world that he brought her into did not help any of this, right? It just reinforced what she already thought about herself. And I think to some extent, Erebin probably knew that. And that's how he was able to keep her trapped with him for so long, is he knew how to play on these parts of her and manipulate her into working for him.
Oh, yeah.
Fuck Erebin Hamel.
Erebin Hamel.
Okay, so my main question from this incident, outside of just the general awful nature of it, is who was the person that ultimately came back to hunt Aelin down? The hooves in the dark magic feeling that Celaena feels makes me think that it was the King of Otterlin. But I suppose that it could have just been an influenced soldier of the king's, I guess. So that's just one of my questions, because we don't get confirmation of who it actually was.
I don't think it was the king. I think that would be way too risky for him getting found out. I think he wants some plausible deniability. On the other hand, he probably doesn't care if people know. But my main theory, and I said it in a previous episode, I still think it was Erebin Hamel or someone from the Assassin's Guild. It just makes sense to me. Erebin would have been about the right age, a young up-and-coming assassin. Plus, this is something that I had not thought about when I first came up with this theory, but his lavish opulence was described in great detail in The Assassin's Blade. And how else could he have that much money, right? Don't get me wrong. Obviously, they're making a lot of money doing their assassinating shit, but he had like stupid money. He built this keep that had plumbing. He's like a modern day billionaire, right? And how else would he have that much money? It seems like the King of Otterlin would pay a pretty high price for the assassination of the King of Terrasen, Ro, who was the heir, his wife, and the next heir, Aelin. And also, it still doesn't answer the question of why else would he have been in Terrasen near the river? What are the freaking odds of that? Is it because he was the assassin who was trying to kill her? Obviously, the guy on the horse, whoever that was, knew she fell in the river. So maybe in looking for her, he started formulating a plan. He's like, maybe I can work this to my advantage. Do you know what kind of leverage this would bring me? I mean, I could use her at any point as a bargaining chip. She is the ultimate get out of jail free card, right? If he ever got into serious trouble, he could just be like, I know where Aelin Galathynius is. Ta-da! So I don't know. That would not surprise me. I also wonder if it's actually not important and we're just never going to find out. It's just a nameless assassin and it doesn't really matter who it was. I do wonder if that's a possibility. So I really want to Google it, but of course I can't, because if it's something big, maybe that'll be like a good Reddit question. Can someone tell me if the name of the assassin is important or if it's never mentioned so I can quit thinking about it?
Right. Agree that it's super suspicious that Erebin just happened to be on the banks of the frozen freaking river. I guess my only counter from the sequence of events is that Aelin looks back at the horse coming after her when she gets like stuck before she starts to run away. And I feel like if it had been Erebin, I feel like that's something she would have mentioned. She would have been like, Erebin Hamel found me and he was the same one that was chasing after me. I don't know. But
yeah, but it was dark. He was on a horse. She was
true.
She's running for her life. She almost died. I mean, very easy. Even if she thought, he could have been like, no, you hit your head, like.
True.
And he was probably disguised or wearing some kind of dark clothing or something. So
yeah, fair. So obviously the download of this fateful night was very long, but the next important thing to discuss is the shift that finally happens to spur Aelin to fight back against the Valg when her memories shift again to show little Aelin, Sam, her family, and many other people reaching out their hands to her. She has the epiphany of realizing that everything from that night had been intentional on the king's part, all designed to cause disruption, separate the family, and make it look like an outside attack, which is so, so important because until now, Aelin has believed that it was her fault that her family died because of her outburst of blue wildfire. At the bottom of this abyss, she realizes that it was not empty darkness, but the earth of her kingdom and people. And there's a beautiful quote where she thinks she would not let that light go out. She would light up the darkness so brightly that all who were lost or wounded or broken would find their way to it, a beacon for those who still dwelled in that abyss. It would not take a monster to destroy a monster, but light to drive out the darkness. She was not afraid. She would remake the world, remake it for them, those she had loved with this glorious burning heart. She was their queen, and she could offer them nothing less. And I got shivers from reading that.
I'm telling you, the writing is so good. The writing is so freaking good.
And then, I don't know, just combined with little Aelin reaching out her hand, and they rise together. I don't have words to accurately describe the feelings that were invoked from this moment. It was so empowering to read, and I just felt renewed with hope that Aelin has finally understood the truth of her past and has able to shift into believing that she can do better for her people and that she would. I especially love that at the core of this evolution is love. She had let herself forget that she was loved and that she loved everyone just as much. And I have always really enjoyed love as a theme, and it immediately made me think of Light It Up from Crescent City.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. We will not give any further context to avoid spoilers, but that is a great parallel. There's something about this way that this is written. I can visualize it so perfectly. I can see Celaena like laying face down on the ground, and then I can see little Aelin with her big turquoise eyes, and then all her family. And I just don't even have the words. Oh, it is so good.
Yeah.
That is such an empowering moment. It's the memory that she had once loved these people. And even though she knows it's not real, but even them saying the worst possible things to her, her love still is enough to overcome the image of them saying those horrible things to her. And that is what finally allows her to face the darkness. She's light. I love a good only light can stomp out the darkness trope. Who doesn't love that, right?
And so with that, we end chapter 54. This is a very large chapter. And now we will move into chapter 55. We are pulled back into the present situation from Rowan's perspective, and I thought it was interesting that even Rowan's power couldn't pierce the darkness, but it still is able to remind him of his worst memories, which in this case is about Lyria. I think this just adds to the idea that Aelin, in the end, is the key. Something about her power specifically grants her the ability to pierce through the darkness in a way that other Fae powers cannot.
Ooh, see, I think I'm going to have to disagree a little. I wonder if it's just Aelin specifically, or if technically anyone can do what she did by facing their darkest memories and overcoming them. And later on in this chapter, Rowan even thinks the creatures fed on despair and pain and terror. But what if the victim let go of those fears? What if the victim walked through them and embraced them? And so I wonder if it's not so much about who Aelin is, but just the ability to face your fear and embrace it and then come out on the other side. I do wonder if Rowan is going to have a similar experience to Aelin, and that he's going to get captured by the Valg and have to face what happened with Lyria and everything, and if he's able to face that. And maybe that's sort of his healing arc in the way that Aelin had one too.
Interesting. That's a good point. Gabriel is attempting to prevent Rowan from going to help Aelin, but he ignores Gabriel because during all these weeks that they had been breathing each other's scents, they had become bonded. She was alive, but could be in any level of torment or decay. Obviously, this bond largely is in reference to the fact that Aelin and Rowan are Caranam, as we will discuss shortly. But I am bookmarking this as evidence, potential evidence, that this bond extends farther than being able to share power. Especially because Rowan is also starling and fighting against Gabriel and Lorcan to get to Aelin, even if it endangers his life. And to add to my latter point, there is a beautiful quote from Rowan that I loved as he tries to get Aelin while reminding himself that Lyria's screams were not real. He thinks Aelin was real and was being drained of life with every moment they held him here.
Yeah, I'm still going to say it's just the Caranam bond. That's all it is. For now, I think. I think a little bit. Rowan seems like the type to protect people at all costs. He's not going to let someone innocent just suffer a horrible fate. It could have been anyone out there, and I feel like he still would have fought the same way to get to them. Probably a little bit more because it is Aelin and all the time they spent together, but it doesn't really surprise me that that was his behavior. I think he probably would have acted similarly.
Fair enough. So in the last episode, we had discussed the nature of Aelin's burnout as she fought off the Valg, and this next quote gives us confirmation that Aelin hadn't truly burned out yet. Everyone hears a rumbling and a brief golden light arcs out of the darkness, and Rowan notes her burnouts had always been self-imposed, some inner barrier composed of fear and lingering desire for normalcy that kept her from accepting the true depth of her power. I do feel this is accurate, especially after finally getting the whole story of how Terrasen fell in the previous chapter. Aelin has always thought of herself as a monster and was therefore unwilling to accept the power that she had, and consequently, this led to her not having full access to her power until she finally chose to accept herself and therefore her power as well.
Okay, so I am happy we got an explanation about Aelin's power. As you said in the last episode, I did express reservations about Aelin burning out just from holding the barrier. Of course, that was a lot of magic and she was being attacked by the Valg Princess, but it still did not align with my impression of the depth of her abilities. Now, I am still a little confused by this explanation because I don't really understand how someone can place superficial limits on their own power that result in the physical manifestations of a burnout. But to be honest, for now, I'm just going to roll with it because I have a feeling this is going to continue to get discussed and explored. And I was thinking about this in the chapter with Dorian Kale later. Dorian needs training in his magic. He needs to be taught about his well and how to tunnel into it because it was describing how he was like grunting and sweating, just drawing a line of power from some crystals. But we get the impression Dorian's very powerful. And I was like, oh, baby's going to need to learn some control. So for now, I'm just going to let it go. Happy to get the information, but it still doesn't quite sit well with me.
Yeah, I agree that there's probably still more to what burnout actually is. But I think from this perspective, we see that Aelin had basically given up. She believed that she deserved this. And so instead of figuring out how to continue accessing her power and trying to fight against it, she was in this like place of deep despair and was giving herself over to the Valg. It's kind of how I interpreted everything that was going out. But yeah, I agree. We still need some more information about what the true depth of their power actually is and what does it actually mean to burn out and how does it happen?
Yeah.
Of course, the most important thing to occur in this chapter is what happens when Rowan reaches Aelin. But there are a couple notes I wanted to make about the sequence just before Rowan transfers his power. So first off, Rowan notes a strange mark was glowing on her brow. This is the same mark that Nehemia, Cain, and the King of Otterland had all seen before, though no one really knew what it was. Based on other books we've read, it's pretty clear that this mark on her brow indicates something very unique about Aelin, and if you know, you know. Point being, I believe Aelin is a special class of Fae, and this mark is a signifier of that. Potentially.
I can either confirm or deny.
I also thought it was interesting that her eyes were rimmed with red instead of the normal turquoise rims. And I think that this is symbolic of the fact that she has now accepted her fire power and transformed into a higher version of herself. It's possible I'm just reading really far into this, but perhaps her turquoise eyes were meant to represent how she previously protected Celaena from Aelin and hid who she was to protect other people. We know that the drop of water in her represents the tiny scrap of healing power she inherited from her mother, and water has always been used to combat her fire when it overwhelms her. Rowan notes the gold and red and blue flames utterly hers, this heir of fire. Spying him at last, she smiled faintly, a queen smile. I just love this. I love, as we've said so many times already, these empowering moments in books for characters. They just get me every single time.
And when he calls her this heir of fire, I was like, oh my gosh, we've come full circle.
And now we can talk about the fact that Rowan and Aelin are Karanom.
Yes. So I have to say two things. The first is we called that shit. As soon as the words Karanom were out of Rowan's mouth, I knew that was going to come up again later. I will say I didn't think it was going to come up this quickly. I had a feeling that Rowan and Celaena were, but I didn't think it was going to be revealed like in this book. So I was kind of surprised by that. Yeah. But I mean, I had a feeling it was going to happen. But I think that perhaps this is the reason that they have such a deep connection and are able to communicate through their thought dialogue, not because they're mates, but because they are Karanom. Sorry to rain on your mate parade, but we'll see. I feel like we need to explore more what it means to be Karanom before we can fully decide what's going on with this connection that they have.
Fair enough. Aelin notes that she knew it would work and she had suspected it for some time, which I was offended by because she literally never indicated she knew to us.
Thank you.
And I feel left out as a reader. Fortunately, we are smart enough and we guessed that this was likely the case, but I was like, what do you mean you knew? There was no thought dialogue at any point throughout the story where you were like, we must be Karanom.
Thank you. There was no like, and she looked at Rowan and wondered, maybe, just maybe, ... There was nothing like that. No trail off, a hint of a thought. She was just like, I knew it. I'm like, how did you know it? Because you didn't seem to indicate that to us as a reader at all.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, before we get into discussing the scene too far, I just wanted to pose a question for thought. Do you think that Aelin has more Karanom out there? And if so, who do you think that they could be?
I don't know. I hadn't thought that there would be another Karanom because I guess Rowan's explanation made it sound like it was really rare. And
it is. Oh, definitely is.
Had like one.
I thought his description indicated that you could have more than one because he says something about people enslaved their Karanom. So the bond is extremely rare, but when these people would find them, then they would enslave them. So my impression is that you could have more than one. However, extremely unlikely given the rare nature of the bond. So I was just curious. And then we also kind of plays back into the discussion we had in one of the previous episodes. Can you be Karanom with someone who isn't Fae or who isn't magical? What are the limitations of that? And we really haven't met that many magical people, you know, Manon.
Right.
Dorian.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess the only other person that I could think of is maybe Dorian, but their relationship has never been written as like they have powers that are, you know, similar and they are a little pair now in the same way that Rowan and Aelin have been written. So yeah, I don't know. So after this, they begin the Karanom process. They both cut their palms and press them together to mix their blood. And Aelin says, to whatever end. And Rowan responds, I claim you too, Aelin Galathynius, before his magic punches into her. Now, I did have an interesting thought about this sequence. I don't know what exactly goes into a blood oath because we don't get information about that. But does this not sound as intense as a blood oath? Just as a thought experiment, if Rowan and Aelin are mates, don't ask me how, it's a thought experiment. Would a mating bond override a blood oath?
Okay, so my understanding of blood oath is a permanent oath that is irrevocable. It cannot be changed. But a Karanom bond can only be sustained as long as they remain through a blood contact. So if Rowan would have let go of her hand, she would have no longer had access to his power. I think he describes that when he describes the Karanom bond. So I don't think a Karanom bond can override a blood oath. Now, can a mating bond override a blood oath? That's a whole other conversation. I have no evidence to support this. My gut instinct is yes, the mating bond overrides all other because a blood oath is a choice. A mating bond is something that is ordained, predetermined, by the word or fate or destiny, whatever the hell you want to call it. I am curious. I know we've talked a lot about like how are we going to get Rowan out of the blood oath bond with Maeve. Maybe there is a mating bond, and because of that connection and pull that they have to each other, he's able to basically say no to Maeve and just break it himself. I don't know. There's a lot of directions you could go with that. So I'm going to say it would seem likely to me, but we haven't even met any mated characters. We are aware that the mating... Oh, wait, no, that's not true. I guess we met Emrys and Malachi. But other than that, we really don't know anything more about the mating bond in this universe and how it works.
Right. I don't know what the long-term implications of them sealing this Care-Nam bond are, but I would imagine it will connect them in a higher way permanently from here on out. Like their bond has leveled up because they exchange blood and magic, which is typically, I feel like, a huge deal in fantasy books. So
I would agree with that.
Also, I want to read the thought that Aelin has because I just really love it. She thinks this was not her end. She had survived loss and pain and torture. She had survived slavery and hatred and despair. She would survive this too, because hers was not a story of darkness. So she was not afraid of that crushing black, not with the warrior holding her hand, not with the courage that having one friend offered, a friend who made living not so awful after all, not if she were with him. She has friends.
I roll. Yes. I don't hate Rowan. I can't even say I dislike him. I'm kind of like neutral, mildly positive about Rowan. I still thought he was awful in the beginning. I don't know. I still feel conflicted.
I didn't think of that quote as being about Rowan necessarily. I just liked it because, again, it's about Celaena and her transition and how she thinks about her relationships with other people, her friends, and just realizing that there are people out there that care about her, I guess, is kind of what drew me.
That's fair. So, yeah, that's fair.
Celaena harnesses Rowan's power and molds it into fire and light, embers and warmth, the glow of 1,000 dawns and sunsets. If the Valg craved the sunshine of Aurelia, then she would give it to them. And then she destroys the Valg.
Yeah! I love that part. Then she would give it to them. Like, I'll give you some sunshine.
And again, I thought this was interesting because this light is indicative of a special form of power. And if you know, you know. But in general, I do really just love the use of light/love to combat dark/evil as a theme.
Oh, yeah. I mean, isn't that at the core of every fantasy book series?
Yes.
I mean, love conquers all, you know? I mean, hello.
Interestingly, before Celaena destroys Narok, he sends one final memory into her head, offering one more vision in a mere heartbeat, not a memory, but a glimpse of the future. I get a bad feeling about it. For some reason, I just get an awful sense that that vision has something to do with both the end of the Valg and the end of Aelin. I'm very much in denial about it, but I get a really bad feeling from that. What else would they be sending a memory about, you know?
It's not a memory. It's a vision of the future. So I wondered, if you go back and read it, it's described that she sees a flash of brown eyes, the mortal being whose form the Valg possessed. Because remember, it even says, like, for a brief heartbeat, it showed appreciation or gratitude. And so it was like the Valg prince obviously didn't want to be destroyed, but the mortal person that it was occupying was grateful to be destroyed so it could be free. And I thought of it more as maybe it was like a helpful vision of the future, because the mortal part of the form that the Valg was inhabiting was left. And it was like, let me give you a gift for releasing me. That's how I kind of took it. But now that you've said that, you could really go either way with that. I just don't see why the Valg would have given her a vision of the future that would have been helpful.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and read it. I just felt like the Valg, I think there was like a transition where it felt like to me there was this final thing that the Valg inside Narok sent out before she destroyed the thing. And then before Narok actually died, after the Valg left his body, he was then offering the smile of relief, like a faint thank you in his eyes before he passed away. But I just felt like anything that a Valg is going to send out is going to be bad if it was the Valg. It could have been Narok, and I had just not been reading that right. But yeah, I don't know. Now I'm confused. about
Same.
what it was.
Same. Hopefully we'll get clarification on that soon.
I hope so. But Celaena obviously destroys the Valg. She like breathes fire into them in this just crazy way. I don't know how to describe it. And then all that's left of them is 4 Wordstone collars. My question is, were the Valg actually destroyed, or were they just forced back into the collars? Or what actually happened to them? I have a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, I had the exact same thought. I have a lot of questions about Wordstones and how they work. How are they created? Should Aelin and Rowan have tried to destroy them? There are so many questions about this that I'm sure we will continue to get answers as the series progresses, but we just don't know enough now. But this probably is going to be a huge point of the plot. If you destroy their mortal form, do you actually destroy them? Or do you need a word key? Or is there, you know, you could go so many different directions with it. I can't even think about it because it makes my head spin. But I think that's going to be a very pressing question in the next book.
Right. Especially because I keep thinking about how the Valg told her we were not beaten or whatever. We were just contained or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And so, like you said, lots of questions. And it's probably just something that we're going to have to keep reading about. So that ends chapter 55. Moving on to chapter 56. The first thing I want to note is I'm so glad that Dorian and Chaol have finally come back together again. I know their relationship is still strained, but it seems like they are turning a corner and finally communicating with each other. I also appreciate that Dorian insists Chaol loop Sorsha in, because I do think that Sorsha may be able to figure some things out from her ability to think as a healer, like she did for Dorian in thinking of this tonic for him. There's a quote that I liked from it, and it says, Dorian made Chaol explain everything. That was Dorian's price, the truth owed to him, and to the woman who deserved to know what she was risking herself for. Something I was curious about when Chaol reveals everything to Sorsha is how unfazed she was to hear the truth about the magic, the word keys, and the tower. And then her reaction when Chaol says, I think that this kingdom could use a healer as its queen. We had previously floated the idea that maybe Sorsha is potentially a Kraken witch working undercover as a healer. And again, it just makes me question if maybe her lack of surprise supports this theory, or I just want to know, what does Sorsha know?
Right? Because I feel like anyone else who would hear that would be freaking the fuck out. They would be shitting themselves, okay? I also wondered if perhaps she knew some of that stuff already or had pieced it together just from being a healer in the castle. Because remember how our introduction to her in this book was that she basically knew everything that had happened between Celaena, Dorian, and Chaol just simply from being observant and listening. So it's very possible she just knows stuff from being a seen, not heard, quote unquote, worker. Also, I did think that it was really touching of Chaol to say to her that basically he thinks she would make a good queen. Also, I hate to rain on anyone's parade. Don't get me wrong, Sorsha is fine, and she and Dorian are very sweet together, but they do not give me epic romance endgame vibes. The thought of her eventually becoming queen is actually kind of hilarious to me. We would have to get some serious page time with her for me to think of her that highly. There's nothing wrong with her character. She's fine. But like, we don't really know anything about her. She kind of only exists through the lens of Dorian in this book. And I'm like, you'd be a fine queen. Like, whoa, bro. Like, the way Dorian goes through women, those are some big words to throw out. So I thought that was kind of weird. So I don't know. That's all. I don't know.
I think Sorsha seems like a character who's here not permanently, but she has a very specific role to play for this particular portion of the series. And then something's going to happen to her. I don't see her making it all the way to the end with Dorian. So
no. And it may not even be bad. Maybe he just finally sends her away to keep her safe or something, and then we don't really hear from her again. But Sorsha as queen, not for it.
But I do like, though, that Dorian insists that she be let in. He doesn't want the piece to be hidden from her, which I think is really important, because what do we hate? We hate miscommunication. And not telling people things.
Thank you. Everyone needs to sit down, like, tell me what you know, and I'll tell you what I know, and everybody exchange information. Thank you.
Exactly. So before Chaol conducts his experiment with Dorian, he has some thoughts about Dorian and Celaena's powers that I thought were interesting. Chaol thinks Dorian had raw power. Celaena had said power to be shaped as he willed it. That was the only thing similar enough to the power of the word keys, neither good nor evil. Clearly, this distinguishes that there is power in Dorian that is different than what Celaena has. And I think we had a brief discussion about this back in Calm. But I found this to be notable because now I want to know what Dorian's magic actually is. And when he associates it with the word keys and that one tiny little line from the last set of chapters about like the Valg's power and how it was dark and icy and, windy, it just made me question what this means for Dorian and what the nature of his magic really is.
I think we're going to get a lot of information about Dorian and his magic in the next book.
I think so too.
I kept thinking all throughout this book, why are people obsessed with Dorian? Not because he's not great, but he's hardly in the damn book. It's really the Chaol, Celaena, Rowan show. So I'm like, he has to become more important as the series goes on, which you would expect being the Crown Prince of Otterlands. I have a feeling Queen of Shadows is going to be very Dorian heavy.
Yes, totally agree. But aside from this, it's interesting to get the confirmation that the word keys are inherently neutral in the same way that word marks are. Just because I don't think we had really known that statistic. I guess you could kind of assume, but we finally get full text confirmation that, they're supposed to be neutral. So the next intriguing event is the whole crystal power process. I obviously still have many questions about this process, but it was a good demonstration to get some more info about it. And my understanding of the events is that Dorian harnessed his power, directed it into the crystals that acted as conduits. They all connected together. And then through this concentration of power, he directed it at the water to freeze it. So I guess the crystals were conduits and also like magnifiers in a way, able to kind of enhance the power that was being put into them. And then the fact that this worked indicates that once the magic is imbued in a conduit of some sort, it will sort of just continue powering itself. Is that what you took away from it as well?
I mean, that's interesting because when Dorian breaks the connection, the water goes back to liquid. So that does beg the question of how the king is holding the spell. So there's got to be more to those towers. I hadn't thought about that until you said that, but it does make me wonder. Huh. I also thought it was interesting in the experiment that he uses red sand from the Red Desert. And if you recall, this is way back, like Murtaugh, Aedion, and Ren are all talking about what they found out. Someone he talked to in the Red Desert and said there were like 2 ripples across the sand. And I wonder if the red sand in the desert is important too. But then there's not that sand everywhere. I don't know. I got some more questions about this. I feel like I have the basic foundation of it, but I don't understand all the necessary, I guess, ingredients that were needed to make it happen, so to speak.
And the second thing that Chaol discovers is that once Dorian accidentally knocks down a crystal, it severs the magic connection and causes the water to unfreeze again. This gives him and Dorian an idea of what could help them break the king's spell. I would imagine it's going to be more complex than just destroying a tower, but this was interesting. And I mean, at least for now, it makes sense to me.
See, funnily enough, I actually don't think it's going to really be more complex than knocking down one of the towers. Now, actually knocking down a tower, that does seem complicated because I'm sure that they're well guarded with physical personnel, but also magic and, well, they're just giant fucking stone statues. They'd be kind of hard to knock down, right? But I'm hoping that the king is too arrogant after all these years and doesn't think anyone is really smart enough to figure it out, let alone actually be crazy enough to knock one of them down. So I'm actually hoping that they may be easier to knock down than you would think, basically because of the king's arrogance. So we'll see. But we're going to have to knock one of them down, I think.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear from this interactions. But yeah, I just keep thinking about how, like, whenever Celaena knocked into them or got close to them, she had those really terrible throbbing headaches. There was a lot of power involved with them. So yeah, there has to be something, because I would imagine that these stone towers are probably going to fight back in their own way, just because they, like, because they're imbued with
Oh.
their own magic and they do not want to be knocked down because they're
Yeah.
associated with the Valg. They need them there in order to keep things open for them or whatever. And so that's what makes me wonder about the complexity of just getting there and knocking that tower down.
Right?
I feel like there's going to be some antagonistic nature to it, because even Aelin herself, when the king was trying to get into her brain and stuff, her magic actively fought against it without her really even realizing it. It was kind of just an innate second nature thing that happened in response to this magic. So yeah. Next, we do get confirmation of the spell origin points, which include the clock tower, Knoll, and Amaroth. Dorian points out that Kaltain and Roland were taken to Morath, which falls along the path from Rifthold to Knoll. His speculation that it wasn't a coincidence just makes me wonder what Kaltain and Roland are really being used for. I had low-key kind of forgotten about them for a bit, but I wonder if because they are magical beings, are they being used as sustenance to either like feed the magic into the system to keep the spell going, or are they being used to feed other Valg that the king has been keeping in his areas? What did you think about that?
To me, I thought the answer was pretty clear just based off everything that's happened, is that I think he's going to use them for the same thing he's using the Demi-Fae for, as host for the Valg. The Valg are his greatest weapons, but it's very tricky to get them into a mortal body. You have to have the right balance of magic, etc. And that's why he did all of this work to get the Demi-Fae. And so to me, it seems very likely that he would use them as hosts for Valg.
That makes sense.
I also thought it was really interesting when Dorian says 2 spots for him to breed whatever army he's making, perhaps drawing on this power as it makes a current through them. And that stood out to me because I think that this may explain why Manon notices the weird smell and all the meat is bad and all the men's blood is all gross and weird in the Omega, because there's a current of dark magic that runs through the Farian Gap from those towers.
Ooh,
I think that would help explain that. So there could be something else, but when he said that, I was like, oh, there's this invisible sort of line between the towers, and since it runs through the Farian Gap, that's what causes that.
Yeah. And then I did like that again, Dorian questions what Chaol actually plans to do with this information. It's clear Chaol is once again conflicted, and I can empathize with his situation. Obviously, they want to get rid of the spell the king has and free other countries from his tyranny, but he also doesn't want to endanger Adarlanians. And I think his thought of destroying the clock tower was an act of war, an act that could endanger the lives of too many people, obviously summarizes that feeling very well. It's clear there's going to be a war at some point, but I agree their assessment that doing something like destroying one of these towers is too risky at this point. They also have no organized army or force to fight back against the king, not to mention literally no one has enough information about the full extent of the king's evil shenanigans to really plan a proper attack against him.
Oh yeah, wearing my Chaol defender hat here. I completely agree. I also think it's interesting that he thinks he didn't even want to tell Aedion or Ren for fear of what they do. They wouldn't think twice before incinerating it, perhaps killing everyone in this castle in the process. And he's talking about destroying the tower, which, totally fair. I think you're right that it's not that Chaol doesn't want to act. He just doesn't want to be stupid about it, especially because they get one shot at this, just one. And if they fuck it up, 100% the king will know that they are onto him, and he will A, kill them all, and B, put all kinds of new protections and defenses around the towers, basically making it impossible to destroy them. So strategy is actually critically important here. And so I appreciate that Chaol is trying to be strategic about taking down the king instead of just running in guns blazing, which is exactly what Aedion and probably Celaena would do.
Yeah, true. And actually, I just had a random thought. What if instead of destroying the towers, they sever the connection or interfere with the connection?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, that's a possibility.
So once again, obviously the question for Chaol will ultimately be related to whether or not he can accept the changing of his reality and the future. And I liked when Dorian says, "You gave me the truth today, so I'll share mine. Even if it meant just being friends again, I don't think I would want to go back to how it was before, who I was before. I think this is a good change too. Don't fear it."
Oh, yeah. This is just a callback to the conversation they had earlier where Dorian calls Chaol out and he's like, you're afraid of the change. You're afraid of what it represents. And I'm happy that Dorian is continuing to push Chaol to be better. I was also honestly very excited by Chaol's thought when he thinks, when Dorian had spoken, it hadn't been a prince who looked at him. It had been a king. And baby, if this is not what I have been waiting for Dorian to finally embrace his future, I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of character development for Dorian in Queen of Shadows. And maybe, just maybe, I will finally understand what all the fuss is about. But I am very proud of Dorian. So good job, Dorian. And that ends chapter 56. So moving on to chapter 57.
The first thing I would like to note is that Rowan had buried the 4 Wordstone collars somewhere out in the forest and had definitely wanted to keep them away from Maeve, which the question is always just, why are you doing that? Why do you want to keep them away from Maeve? What could Maeve do if she had them?
But then again, Maeve can compel him to tell her where he put them. So also kind of confused by that as well.
Yeah, true. I had forgotten about that. I did wonder if there is some evil magic in there or the Valg are now trapped in there and can be harnessed somehow if they are found. And it just begs the question of, again, what actually happened to the Valg when Aelin destroyed them? I also thought that Rowan's dynamic with his cadre is interesting, but I think the dissonance he feels between the members who hadn't even paused to assess what was happening to Aelin during the battle with the Valg is a direct reflection of how much Rowan is changing and questioning his allegiance to Maeve as well. It feels evident to me that Gabriel at least is questioning things as well because he warns them to be careful when they face Maeve. But, I continue to be curious about how his relationship to his other members and then also to Maeve will change with this whole experience.
I thought it was really interesting too. Rowan was so persistent about Aelin answering the question. And when she asked why, he told her it was none of her business. Rowan is not really an inherently nosy character. He really strikes me as someone who doesn't care unless it's relevant to him and the situation. Not in a selfish way, just kind of like, don't bother me with the mundane. Give me the important, pertinent, relevant information and don't waste my time. And so it does pique my interest that he was so persistent about this in a particular. I don't know if it's just because he cares about Aelin or I don't know. It seemed a little odd to me. And I have a feeling we'll be making references back to this conversation at some point in the future.
Yeah, it really does beg the question of what does Rowan know about Maeve? Because obviously he's learned quite a bit from having this blood oath with her and serving her for a very long period of time. But I do like Aelin's thought about Gabriel in this interaction as well. And she thinks, like Rowan, he was enslaved to Maeve, and yet he thought to warn them. With the blood oath, Maeve could order him to divulge every detail, including this moment, and punish him for it, but for his friend. And I wonder if this is a little bit of foreshadowing for a conflict that will maybe break up Rowan's cadre at some point. But if nothing else, it seems like Gabriel is sympathetic to Rowan's situation and perhaps feels similarly to him in questioning his allegiance to Maeve to some extent. I also love that Aelin thanks Gabriel for warning them and hesitating. It just shows how much she has changed from this experience because she understands the symbolic significance of that hesitation. Plus, I think it shows Gabriel's compassion. Despite the blood oath to Maeve, he seems apathetic and wants to do the right thing if he can.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to like Gabriel. I think he's maybe not like Rowan in the way that he's all mean and softy on the inside, but I think Gabriel is inherently good, is my impression.
And he's also gotten a lot more page time than the other members so far.
True.
They seem to have a closer connection, perhaps, than Rowan and some of his other members. So,
very true.
As Rowan and Celaena discuss next steps and her future as the king's #1 enemy, she has a revelation about the amulet that we definitely have to talk about. I think this was like the biggest piece of information that we got from this chapter.
Yep.
She remembers how Terrasen had always been protected and had grown prosperous and powerful, yet remained uncorrupted. It was a beacon that drew the brightest and boldest among them. This revelation leads her to believe that the Amulet of Orinth is the third and final word key. She thinks the word keys weren't inherently bad or good. What they were depended on how the bearers used them. One of them had been unknowingly used for good and had protected its bearers for millennia. So, very exciting. I was like, oh my God, third word key. But I will honestly say, I was just confused about how this fits the third stanza of the poem a little bit. It was very unexpected to me. I don't know why. The third stanza of the poem in calm was, where the third lies will never be told by voice or tongue or sum of gold. I guess it's just because the people who knew where it was are now dead and therefore can't tell people where it is or like what it actually is. I also felt like it was just a very sudden revelation because, again, Celaena had never indicated any thought about this word key prior. Maybe I just missed something and I wasn't reading very closely, but I feel like it just came on very suddenly and there wasn't enough little crumbs to follow prior to this for me to be like, oh, wow, we finally know. Like it just came out of left field for me. So I was a little unsatisfied with this revelation that this was the third word key. I don't know why.
Really? See,
Yeah.
Okay, so to address your first concern, I completely agree with you. Let me back up. I'll start with what I do agree with. I was also confused how it fits the third stanza. I went back and reread it. I really don't understand. Maybe I'm just not clever or riddle-minded. I don't know. But I disagree. I thought the revelation was super exciting. Now, I do agree with you. There's not a ton of buildup to it. But I think that's part of what makes it exciting is that there was no buildup to it. And I think the reason why Celaena had never even had this thought is because it took her experience with the Valg and facing the memory of the night that she died for her to be able to even process that memory and realize that she had the word key, right? Because throughout the entire series, there's these constant descriptions of how she took those memories and locked them in her heart tight and couldn't even think about any of those. And so it wasn't until she faced the Valg, faced her fears and embraced them that she was then able to process that memory and then have the realization about the third word key. Also, I have to point out here, it's possible she's wrong. Maybe she thinks it's going to be there and we're going to go through this whole thing with Erebin and getting the amulet. And then guess what? That's not where the key is. Maybe inside the amulet is a clue to the word key or something. So we don't know for sure that it is in the amulet. It seems likely, especially given the description of how she probably should have drowned or she should have frozen to death, but the word key kept her protected. That being said, maybe it was just the word marks that saved her. So I did like it. But what I liked most of all about this is that it finally means we're going to have to go confront Erebin Hamel and we're going to get my questions answered like, where is he? What is he doing? Because it is time. It is time. For too long, I have been plagued by these questions. So I liked it. I thought it was exciting.
Okay, that's a good point. We're coming, Erebin Hamel. We're going to find you.
Freaking coming. Hide your kids, hide your wife, because we're coming.
So after this discovery, then it did lead me to another question, which is if they, as in Terrasen, had a damn word key this whole time, how come it wasn't useful in fighting back against the king? If it can protect Celaena when she's like falling into the river, how is it that it did not protect or do anything when they had it this entire time against the king and his little magic invasion? You know, I just have a lot of questions about the nature of this word key and what it was actually doing. Yes. I don't know.
Well, let me assuage some of your concerns. Number one, what if there's no word key? What if she just thinks that's where it is, but it's not? Okay. Secondly, you have to remember that nobody knows that the word key is in there. Nobody knows. My impression is that Evelyn wrote, nobody knew. I highly doubt that Evelyn would have given something that powerful to an 8-year-old to help her sleep. And later on, it even says Brandon had placed the third sliver of the word key inside the amulet and never told a soul what he had done with it. So I don't think anyone knows that it's in the amulet. Also, let's say hypothetically they did know, whatever. I think that the word key's power, at least in the shape of the amulet, it can only protect whoever's wearing it. And that is why Aelin was protected against the attack, because if you recall, it's that dark, stormy darkness, and like her parents didn't even stir. They didn't sense anything. And I think it's because the word key inside the amulet sort of created this protective bubble against that dark magic. And so to me, it makes sense that the amulet wasn't helpful when the king invaded, because they didn't even know it was there to really access his power. Plus, only Aelin was the one who possessed it, and that's why she survived.
I guess. I kind of read that reasoning of why Evelyn actually gave it to her a little bit differently. I had assumed that she had given it to Aelin knowing it would protect her.
Oh.
She may not have known entirely, but she had that whole spiel about this will protect you. It will help you like lead you home. It's been in the family forever. And so, I don't know. I just feel like they had to have some inclination that it was a really powerful and important item. I agree, though, that it's possible that they just didn't know that it was a word key. And I guess my reasoning for that was because perhaps it's like their version of the Eye of Elena, and they didn't actually know its true power or purpose because it's something only a chosen one or someone specific can only harness or access the power of what it's for. Because Celaena is the first one to have fire power, and even just a power in general that's similar to Brannon. It doesn't seem like anybody else in the family had gotten that power yet, you know?
Yeah.
Celaena is obviously like very unique. And so I'm almost wondering if it's only gonna work for her, or it's only intended to work for somebody specific, or there has to be some kind of trigger maybe for how the word key ultimately works. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but
I don't know. There's a lot of directions you could go with it. So I think we'll find out more as Celaena tries to get a hold of this amulet again. But I'm still waiting for a plot twist. She opens it up and there's no word key in there. That's what I'm still waiting for, honestly. What I thought was interesting about the amulet was that it had word marks on the back of it, and that they had been activated the night Aelin fell into the river. And it said it had protected her that night she fell into the river, for it had been word marks she'd seen glowing in the river depths. And I am just very interested to know what those word marks meant. And I really hope when she does get the amulet, because we know she's studied up on the word marks a little bit, so I hope she's able to read them and is revealed what exactly the word marks say.
I still have a lot of questions about the word marks. I still am confused about what they ultimately are. Where did they come from? Who created word marks in the first place? There's a lot of questions about the nature of them, and I don't know. I got questions. Okay. I do not feel satisfied with the information we've gotten about word marks so far. I need more information. So
listen, have a little sweet treat and just relax. Okay. Trust the process. Trust the process.
Relax. Okay. Of course, nothing is simple. So now we know supposedly where the third word key is, but of course, it's with Erebin fucking Hamill. And honestly, how does this motherfucker somehow end up on top every damn time? I truly just can't wait for his downfall. But naturally, my question is, do you think Erebin Hamill actually knows what this amulet really is?
Ooh, asking the hard questions today, huh? Yes. I'm going to say that if he does know, it is probably only recently that he discovered it. I definitely don't think he knew when he first took it many years ago. However, Erebin does strike me as someone who likes to collect rare and beautiful things, as we've discussed before. I think he probably recognized the amulet in the sense of its rarity and value, but not for the power it truly possessed. It also wouldn't surprise me if he used his vast resources to research what the language on the back was and what it meant. I should probably also point out here that we know absolutely nothing about Erebin's personal history and background. Maybe he possesses some deeper levels of knowledge about magic in his history, or maybe he knows nothing at all. So I'm going to say he definitely did not know at the time. If he does know, it was only recently that he discovered it via his research. It's also possible he just thinks it's a rare treasure from a fallen kingdom. But mostly I'm leaning towards no. He doesn't realize how powerful it is, would be my guess.
Erebin is just scared.
But truly.
How he ended up on that river, why he took Aelin, now he has his amulet. If this was all just luck and he just happened upon these things.
Oh my God. Luckiest person in the world. Seriously.
I doubt it's that, though. Nobody gets lucky like that many times.
You know what? That's a good point.
It was calculated. Like,
too coincidence.
Yeah, too coincidental for it to be just a coincidence. So on a brighter note, though, I am just so happy that Celaena finally revealed her whole truth to someone for the first time ever. And then she finally conjures up a little droplet of water.
Aww.
She's just come so far. And this is monumental for her to not only accept herself and her past, but also be able to trust and confide in someone else about everything and the whole truth. You can tell she's finally at peace when there's the line that says she smiled at him and he looked at her for a while before he smiled back. A different smile than all the others he'd given her before. It's safe to say that by the end of this chapter, Celaena is now ready to be Aelin Ashryver Galathynius, the Queen of Terrasen and the Heir of Fire. I also really like that at the end, she tells Emrys and Luca, when I reclaim my kingdom, the Demi-Fae will always have a home there, and you two and Malachi will have a place in my household, should you wish it, as my friends. Her usual friendship and a sense of belonging has always been a huge theme for Celaena throughout the books, and it just makes me very happy that she has not only found friends, but also kind of a family among the Demi-Fae.
Yeah, I hope that Emrys and Luca make it through the series, and I hope they find their way to Terrasen. Do I feel good about the possibility of that? No, I do not. But I'm going to ignore my fears and cling to the hope.
Let's hope so. But that ends chapter 57, and now we are ready to get to our final chapter, chapter 58. We learn Ren was set to head to Syria to talk with Sol. And as a brief refresher from chapter 24, Ravi and Sol's parents had been former court members of Orlan's court. Syria is an important source of trade business to the king, so it had been left intact, although the trade-off was that their father was executed. Sol is now the current lord of Syria, and it's unclear whether they would be supportive of Aelin, since she had, quote, 10 years to account for. From that chapter, we had also learned Syria is pretty wealthy because of its trade, and it makes sense that if they can get support from Syria, it would be helpful to have their wealth to fund the rebellion. I think it's still unclear what exactly they're going to ask of them, though, and of course, we do ultimately need to see what Sol and Ravi decide to do. I think a lot of this chapter was pretty straightforward, as Murtaugh informs Aedion, Ren, and Chaol about Aelin being alive and how she destroyed Narok and his men. Murtaugh's statement that she saved a great number of people with magic, fire, they say, power the likes of which the world has not seen since Brandon himself, was again just adding to the fact that Aelin's gift and power is truly special, and it's significant that she has this power at all.
Also, side note, where the fuck is Brandon and what is he doing?
I don't know. The way they talk about Brandon makes me think that he's already dead at this point, but I guess you don't really know for sure. Because then they have like a stag.
I don't think he is. He strikes me as someone who was king for a long time and then decided to step down because he realized that, you know, being king forever could make him corrupt like Maeve. Obviously, being queen forever ain't done a lot for her. But then it's like, where the hell is he? Where has he been all this time? What is he doing? I don't think he's dead because I think that would be well known if he had died. I'm just saying, if Maeve is still alive, then he can definitely still be alive. But I just want to know where the fuck he is.
I keep forgetting that Maeve is freaking old. I don't know why. It keeps slipping my mind. And I'm like, oh yeah, they were alive around the same time.
Yes.
The significance of this moment truly can't be understated because it definitely is a turning point for the rebellion's momentum. With the knowledge that Aelin is alive and served men from the king's army their asses, it's clear people will feel inspired and hopeful again that change is coming. I also loved Aedion's thought. It was a message to the world. Aelin was a warrior, able to fight with blade or magic, and she was done with hiding.
Woo! Not only does this news have implications for Aelin, but it also puts Aedion in serious danger. Aedion is going to have to be very careful moving forward, and he even thinks this to himself when he says, the moment he entered the palace, he would have to consider his every step, every breath. Too many eyes would be on him now, because everyone knows that he's Aelin Galathynius' cousin, and it's going to put a lot of heat and pressure on him. Like, did you know that she was still alive? Where does your loyalty lie? And it does make me anxious about Aedion and his safety. I'm not feeling good. Not feeling good. Let me say that. I love Aedion.
That's true.
That happened to him.
Well, he's going to be under a lot of pressure, not only from the king's side, but I would imagine also from the rebellion. Because now that people have this renewed hope, they're going to be like, yo, Aedion, what's going on? Yeah. Are we going to make a move? And if Aedion's kind of still on the fence because they don't know, I'm sure people are very anxious to get things going. Right. And like overthrow the king of Otterland. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of risk. As Murtaugh prepares to depart again, Chaol grabs his reins for one final message that I find to be very thoughtful. Chaol says to him, send word to Eoway, tell them to hold on, tell them to prepare. And then Aedion could have sworn there were tears in the captain's eyes as he said, tell them it's time to fight back.
Oh, I loved this. And as a Chaol defender, it really warms my heart when he makes a public showing of doing the right thing. I think he thinks of Eoway specifically because, remember back in TOG, he saw how the news of the deaths of the 500 rebels affected both Nehemia and Celaena. And of course, the recent news of the king killing all the slaves in Calcula and Dovir was obviously very upsetting to him. And so I think it's really touching that he thinks of Eoway specifically.
I think we also get a larger picture of why the Assassin's Blade was so important to read and her experience there. Mm-hmm. So there's a quote that says, across the White Fangs in the runes, all the way to the Western Wastes, and a red-haired queen who ruled from a crumbling castle, to the deserted peninsula and the oasis fortress of the silent assassins. Hold on. The writers told the world, hold on. These were all places that Celaena adventured to, and now we know that the allies that she formed along the way are most likely going to come into play and fight on her behalf. Or at least I hope.
I know, and especially the red-haired queen. Could that be a reference to Ansel, perhaps? Mm-hmm. I kind of forgot about the silent assassins, and so I really hope we all see them come together. I really do. I also loved when it's described that they make their way to Eoway. It's noted that the king and queen of Eoway still wear their midnight mourning clothes, and this is clearly in honor of Nehemia, and it's still so heartbreaking. It seems like her death was so long ago, but in actual time, it's maybe been a few months, and so it's very sad.
So to round out the set of chapters, we shift to Dorian's perspective, and despite the king's rage and pointless executions that he conducts as a huge fucking baby, Dorian has the thought that I just love so much because him and Celaena really do have a wonderful friendship and understanding. It says somewhere in Wendelin, his friend was changing the world. She was fulfilling the promise she made to him. She had not forgotten him or any of them still here. And perhaps when they figured out a way to destroy the tower and free magic from his father's yoke, she would know her friends had not forgotten her either, that he had not forgotten her. When Celaena got back, when she returned as she'd sworn she would, then they would set about changing the world together.
Oh, together.
Yeah, I'm so ready for a Dorian-Aelin combo. And I'm also really excited to see how Dorian's power and involvement with everything evolves as well. Because obviously so far, as we've talked about, he hasn't done a whole lot in this book. But you know that there is something big in store for him, I think, moving on.
Absolutely. And also my only note for this was, blech, Dorian Schmorian.
Why?
I know, just kidding. I just had to get under your skin. No, I agree completely. I'm excited to see Dorian's storyline progress. I'm excited for him to do anything. To be honest,
true.
As I mentioned earlier in the episode, he hasn't really done much. I mean, I don't dislike him at all. I think he's fine, but he ain't really moving the needle for me, you know? So I'm excited to actually see him do quite literally anything.
Fair enough. And yeah, okay, guys, that ends our analysis portion. So now we just have our favorite moments to share. So,
okay. I love when Aelin says to Dorian, you need not be so formal. We do not put on airs. And Hen, one of the men, coughed pointedly. She could almost hear him saying, says the little lady with her hair pressed into careful curls and wearing her new dress that she threatened to skin us over if we got dirty. And if that is not the most Aelin Celaena thing in the entire world, I don't know what is. On a more somber note, I love the quote. That moment, Lady Marian had chosen a desperate hope for her kingdom over herself, over her husband and the daughter who would wait and wait for a return that would never come. That was the moment that had broken everything Aelin Galathynius was and had promised to be. That was the moment she could not face and had not faced. For even then, she had known the enormity of that sacrifice. And as we know, this gets Addison in her feels, as those of you who listened to me cry on a public platform earlier. And I have no other where you guys know,
Oh, yeah.
I know.
There's too many moments. There's just too many beautiful, wonderful moments. But
I know.
Lady Marian, you did not die in vain. Okay, so then one of my favorite moments from chapter 54, and as Aelin's reliving this memory, is the tail end of it when it says, Aelin Galathynius smiled at her, hands still out. Get up, the princess said. Celaena reached across the earth between them and brushed her fingers against Aelin's and arose.
Oh, yes, that is such a powerful moment. Similarly, in that space, I liked when it's written, there was solid ground beneath her, moss and grass, not hell, earth. The earth on which her kingdom lay, green and mountainous and as unyielding as its people. Her people waiting for 10 years, but no longer. And if that quote doesn't make you like, yeah, like fist pump, I don't know what will.
I think the rest of mine were pretty positive, but my next favorite one was from when Rowan meets her and right before they're about to seal the Karen bond, she says to him, to whatever end, and then Rowan says, I claim you too, Aelin Galathynius.
I knew you'd love that one. I knew that one would get you. Yeah. And my last one for me, finally, well, I guess Lauren and I had one that we both doubled down, but I'm going to have her read it. But when Aelin finally tells Rowan her story, I am just so proud of her and how far she's come. It had to be so hard for her to tell him that. And I just love that she was able to be vulnerable and share that with somebody.
I agree. And I think similarly in that portion when she begins her story of her background to Rowan, I like the part where it says, once upon a time in a land long since burned to ash, there lived a young princess who loved her kingdom very much. And I really like that part because it felt like to me, Aelin is retelling the story from a new perspective. And she now understands that this is not the end or Terrasen. It feels like it's going to be born again. Or at least I hope that it's going to arise from the ashes.
You're right. That's nice.
And then this was the quote that Addison and I both liked. And it says, a woman was smiling back at her. Beautiful for every scar and imperfection and mark of survival. Beautiful for the fact that the smile was real and she felt it kindle the long slumbering joy in her heart.
Our girl.
Our queen.
Our queen. I wonder if I'll start calling her Aelin now. She still kind of seems like Celaena to me. We'll see.
I think I was switching a little bit back and forth in my notes. Like sometimes I talk about Aelin, sometimes I'd say Celaena. I don't know. It's both for now. But that now concludes our episode. And thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booktown Fantasy Podcast. As always, we are so glad that you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and check out our social media pages to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today. So stay nerdy, everyone, and we'll catch you all next week for Heir of Fire episode 12. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. The two beds that they're referring to I don't, wait, now I can't speak the sentence.
The two beds referring to are.
Thank you. Okay. I was going to sneeze or yawn. I don't know what I was going to do there.
Yeah. But,
you're frozen. Hold on, you froze for a second. You froze and then it went back, but then you started to lag. So my understanding, a blood oath, oh my God, a blood oath